Chapter 874. Rumble. On the road to Anshi, the earth quaked and the heavens swayed. 18 or 19 people stood on each carriage, pulled by 4 horses as they galloped along the cement road. Unlike ordinary carriages, each of these carriages had a white folding sail attached to them. The sail was around 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide. When the wind was in their favor, the sail would be unfurled to increase the speed of the transport. And when the wind was against the wind, the soldiers on the carriages would fold the sail as quickly as possible. Zhang Shouji had built these according to Wang Chang's instructions, using the principles of sails in the hopes that they could transport the Qixi Protectorate to Talas as quickly as possible. As he entered the western regions, Wang Chang's brow began to slowly crease. This war had an even stronger effect on the western regions than he had imagined. When Wang Chong had first met Hulieg, he had been to the western regions. At the time, the western regions had been extremely prosperous. The 9 families of Zhaowu, the 36 kingdoms of the western regions, and the merchants of Arabia and Karak Spazinu had all gathered here. Pearls, agate, and spices could be found everywhere. It was precisely because the merchants of these countries had gathered here that the western regions could prosper and prosper. But when Wang Chong entered the western regions, all the markets were desolate, with not a single person to be seen. The cities he passed through were practically deserted, and the air was thick with tension. It seems like the war between the Tang dynasty and Arabia has had an even greater effect on the western regions than I imagined. All the Hu merchants sensed the danger and retreated ahead of time. As Wang Chong rode on the white-hoofed shadow, he looked around at the tall and short buildings around him. The streets of this massive city were empty, and Wang Chong could see only a few people. Moreover, they were all nervously watching from a distance, not daring to approach. The scout only glanced in the direction of these people, and a moment later, bang bang bang. All the doors and windows were tightly shut. "Zhang Ke, what's the situation?" Wang Chong asked. Replying to Marquis, "All of the birds have already spread out in a 50-kilometer radius, and there is nothing out of the ordinary. In addition, General Su Kui sent a letter saying that the mission has been completed. They are about 100 miles ahead of us." General Su Kui asked if they need to wait for us and meet up with us. Zhang Ke rode his horse and quickly followed from behind. "There's no need. Tell them to hurry up. None of the Karluks are to be left behind," Wang Chong said. When he said the last sentence, Wang Chong's voice suddenly became incomparably cold. "The Hu fear might, but not virtue." The Karluks were the key to this battle, but Go Xianji had been too conceited, so conceited that he thought these mercenaries would never betray him. Higher, these people work for money, but Gao Xianji specially arranged for them to be at the back of the army. This was simply digging their own graves. But now that he had switched to Wang Chong, everything was different. The merciful cannot command an army. War was a matter of great importance to the imperial court and the common people. Any kind of mercy was a woman's benevolence, not something a commander could accept. If the Karluks betrayed the Tang dynasty, they had to be prepared to pay the most grievous price. In addition, pass on my order. Have the horses for the transport carriages be swapped with the horses for the cavalry. Increase the speed of the march. Wang Chong said. "Yes, Marquis." Zhang Ke bowed from his horse and quickly left to carry out the order. Once Zhang Ke was gone, Wang Chong's eyes flashed as he turned to the vast army in front of him. Unlike the haste of the First War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had made the most preparations this time. More than 100,000 soldiers were working together, and all the supplies were in place. Wagon after wagon flowed along the newly constructed cement road between Anshi and Qixi. But the speed of the march was still too slow. The infantry, craftsmen, axemen, and spearmen could not compare to the speed of cavalry. Moreover, Wang Chong's army also had a considerable number of ballistae. Ballistae were also known as bed ballistae, and each one was extremely large. Moreover, because they were forged from the finest steel, they were also extremely heavy. Each transport carriage could only carry 2 or 3 ballistae. This fact alone made it impossible for Wang Chong's army to move quickly. But Wang Chong was already doing his utmost to increase the speed of the march. Whether it was by adding small sails to the transport carriages or by swapping out the horses for the carriages with the cavalry's horses so that the horses could rest and conserve as much energy as possible, all of this was to increase the speed of the march so that they could reach the city of Talas earlier. Days passed, and the closer they got to the northwest, the thicker the atmosphere of war became, the more desolate and somber the cities became. Around 3 days later, a sandstorm howled up ahead. Beneath the dark clouds hanging low in the sky, a vast and majestic city, clearly built in the style of a strategic military fortress, gradually came into view. This city was completely different from other cities. On the city walls, there was a beacon tower every 10 feet or so, as well as an observation tower. This was something that only the military would use. "This is the 4 garrisons of Anxi," Wang Chong quietly said to himself. In the western regions, the most famous garrisons of the Tang dynasty were the 4 garrisons of Anxi, Suiye, Kucha, Khotan, and Shul. This was also where the Tang dynasty's Anxi protectorate was located. If one wanted to travel from Qixi to Talas, Anxi was a place that one had to pass through. In his last life, although Wang Chong had heard of the 4 garrisons of Anxi, he had never had the chance to go there, much less meet them. Hiya! Wang Chong suddenly urged his horse forward, galloping from the rear of the group. Behind him, Su Kui and the others exchanged glances and hurriedly followed. The buildings of Anxi were not as refined as those of the Central Plains, and they had a crude air to them. As Wang Chong led his men forward, he finally got a clear view of the 4 garrisons of Anxi. This massive city was crudely constructed, built from massive blocks of stone and then covered in thick layers of mud. Only then did this ancient and massive city come into being. After standing in Anxi for so many years, the surface of this city was covered in the scars of war and swords. Many places were charred, and there were even a few places where one could see the remains of catapults. The frequent wars had also dyed the city in a layer of black and red. Suiye. Wang Chong raised his head and immediately saw the 3 modeled characters on the gate. Wang Chong's heart trembled at the sight of these 3 characters. I didn't think that it would be this city. Of the 4 garrisons of Anxi, the one that Wang Chong was most familiar with was this legendary city of Suiye. The reason was very simple. In another space-time, this was the birthplace of an immortal poet, and it was also the birthplace of many famed frontier generals. The farthest frontier fortress of the Tang dynasty was precisely this city of Suiye. The army advanced slowly and majestically all the way into Suiye city. With the departure of Gao Xianji and the 30,000-some soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army, this heavily guarded fortress had become a defenseless fortress. The gates of Suiye were wide open, and there was no one standing guard. "Marquis, there's a stone stele here." When they were still several dozen zhang from the gate, Zhang Ke suddenly pointed to the side of the road. Wang Chong suddenly stopped. This was a huge stone tablet. After being exposed to wind, sun, rain, as well as a long period of time, it had become very mottled. If one didn't look carefully, one would think that it was a brown rock about 2 men tall lying on the side of the road. But with just a glance, Wang Chong couldn't help but widen his eyes. Patrolling on behalf of the heavens. Wang Chong recognized it at a glance. In his last life, before the emergence of his clan, Wang Chong had never left the capital, much less the western regions. Even in his wanderings, he had never been to the western regions. In the western regions, the 4 great garrisons of Anxi had a thunderous reputation, but there was something even more famous, the stele of patrolling on behalf of the heavens. When Wang Chong was still learning to read, he had heard of this stone stele. In truth, there were probably very few people in the capital who didn't know of this stele. This was because it had been set up by a very special person. Ban Chao. The first true Anxi Protector General in the history of the Central Plains. Although it had been Zhang Qian who had opened up the western regions for the first time in the history of the Central Plains and expanded the power of the Central Plains into the western regions. But it was Ban Chao who truly ruled and wielded influence here several hundred years later. The successive dynasties of the Central Plains had constantly gained and lost in the western regions, even losing contact with each other for several hundred years. Countless western regions protector generals had emerged in the intervening years. But when one truly traced back to the past. The first protector general of the western regions was Ban Chao, a scholar of the Great Han Dynasty more than 1,000 years ago. Although the western regions is far, it is still a land of the kings of the Central Plains. The Son of Heaven finds it difficult to attend to. As a subject of the Son of Heaven, I will patrol on behalf of the Son of Heaven. Forever guard the gates of the country. Back when Ban Chao was stationed in the western regions, he had spoken such words that even the deaf could hear, inspiring countless generations of people with lofty ideals to advance and expand into the western regions, resulting in the Great Tang's current situation in the western regions. The place where Ban Chao had set up this stele was said to be the place where Zhang Qian had left the fortress for the first time, the furthest place Zhang Qian had ever reached. This stele had always been heavily guarded by the successive protectorates. But later on, after the defeat of the Tang dynasty in the Battle of Talas and the annihilation of Gao Xianji's 30,000 elite soldiers, the Arabs had come east. They had passed through the Tsong Mountains and advanced into the 4 garrisons of Anxi, and the first thing they had destroyed was this stele. The stele of patrolling on behalf of the heavens had been dragged back to Arabia and thrown into the sea. When the news had first arrived, countless people of the Central Plains had felt a heartache. Wang Chong had also been wringing his hands, viewing it as the greatest regret of his life. Not even Wang Chong had expected that he would be able to fulfill his long-cherished wish of seeing this stele of patrolling on behalf of the heavens. As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Wang Chong suddenly dismounted from the white-hoofed shadow as everyone looked on in shock. Relax. This time, the Arabs won't have a single chance to step into the gates of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong's heart was heavy as he respectfully bowed and said to himself, "Don't worry." This stele had been entrusted to the hot-bloodedness and dreams of countless loyal subjects of the Central Plains. This was their dream, and it was the dream of the entire Central Plains. Wang Chong would never allow this dream to be sullied. "Let's go." Wang Chong took in a deep breath and quickly mounted his horse. Calling out to his men, he rode toward Suiye. Chapter 875. Withered leaves drifted through the air over Suiye. Compared to the other cities, this city was more like the interior of the Central Plains. The ground was paved with gray stone and had a damp feel to it. And on both sides of the road, there were more buildings of the Central Plains. Most importantly, there were finally more people here than in other places. It was no longer like other places, which were completely empty, with only a few merchants in sight. However, the atmosphere of war here was also much stronger than anywhere else. Clang clang. Suddenly, the clanging of metal came from the distance, accompanied by the sounds of fighting. "Zhang Ke, what's going on? Why are there sounds of fighting up ahead?" Wang Chong frowned and gestured for Zhang Ke to come over. The Anxi Protectorate army was already on the front lines, fiercely battling with the Arabs. There shouldn't be any fighting in the city at a time like this. Reporting to Marquis, it's a group of bandits in Suiye. We don't know when they appeared, but when we discovered them, they were setting the city on fire and pillaging. Our troops are currently fighting with them and should be able to defeat them very quickly. Bandits? Isn't this the territory of the Anxi Protectorate? Isn't Feng Chongqing still in the residence? Why would bandits appear here? Wang Chong sternly said, his brow creased. Although Gao Xianji had taken with him nearly 90% of the Anxi Protectorate army, he had still left 10% behind to guard the rear. With these great Tang soldiers guarding the rear, this sort of situation shouldn't have occurred. Moreover, one of the twin walls of the empire, Feng Chongqing, was holding down the rear? I'm not sure. Zhang Ke shook his head, a look of confusion in his eyes. Based on what our Eagle team has seen from the sky, there's probably more than one group of bandits in Sueya, and this situation has probably been going on for some time. General Kong Xian is currently leading his men to drive out the bandits. I'm confident that it won't be long before all of them are eliminated. Wang Chong nodded. We'll know once we ask Feng Chongqing. Just as he was speaking, the sound of galloping hooves could be heard. A messenger passed through the heavy ranks and suddenly rushed over from the front. Report. Marquis, Anshi Vice Protector General Feng Chongqing requests an audience. Oh. Wang Chong's eyes flashed in surprise. Speak of the devil, and the devil appears. Without much time to think, Wang Chong patted his warhorse and immediately moved forward. On the side of the official road, beside a green government office, a few figures stood quietly. The leader was an ugly, dark-skinned middle-aged man with a straight back and a gentle demeanor. He looked extremely confident. Behind him were four burly soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army, long sabers strapped to their waists. It was unknown how long the four of them had been standing there, but their expressions were slightly anxious. He's here. At the sight of Wang Chong's horse, Feng Chongqing's eyes brightened, his heart overjoyed. As if he had found his savior, he led the four elites of the Anshi Protectorate Army forward to meet the enemy. For nearly 2 months, Feng Chongqing had been anxiously waiting, every day like an ant on a hot pan. Only he knew how he had managed to endure these 2 months. Now that Wang Chong had finally led an army of more than 100,000 soldiers through Sueya, Feng Chongqing felt much more at ease. In truth, as Wang Chong's constant evasions, he had once suspected that Wang Chong was just making up excuses. But at this moment, when he saw the surging Qixi Protectorate, Feng Chongqing no longer had any doubts. And what excited Feng Chongqing the most was that he had originally believed that Wang Chong would only bring 20 to 30,000 soldiers at most. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would bring reinforcements that far surpassed his expectations. Marquis, you've finally arrived. Feng Chongqing strode forward, bowing in front of Wang Chong's white-hoofed shadow and clasping his hands in greeting. The moment these words left his mouth, Feng Chongqing could no longer hold back his tears. The city of Talas was in a perilous situation, and he had not received a single letter in more than 3 days. Although he was extremely anxious, he could not show it, because everyone was watching him. If even he panicked, then all of Anshi would be finished. But after waiting for so long, this day had finally arrived, Wang Chong's arrival. "Milord, there is no need for such courtesy." Wang Chong's expression turned serious, and he hurriedly dismounted and helped Feng Chongqing up. Feng Chongqing was a famed general of Anshi, one of the twin walls of the empire. In terms of age and seniority, he had far surpassed Wang Chong, but in terms of status, Wang Chong had far surpassed Feng Chongqing. Gao Xianji had left Feng Chongqing to guard the rear, giving him the position of Vice Protector General. But Wang Chong was Qixi's Protector General, and the young Marquis that had been personally conferred by the Holy Emperor. In this aspect, Feng Chongqing could not compare. Thus, when Feng Chongqing met Wang Chong, he needed to bow as a subordinate. "Dare I ask, my lord, what is the current situation in the western regions? What is Lord Gao Xianji's situation? And when I just entered the city, I saw bandits running amok. Aren't there still soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army stationed in Sueya? Why is something like this still happening?" Wang Chong got straight to the point. Wang Chong had long since heard of Feng Chongqing's reputation. In his last life, the twin walls of the empire had been 2 of the brightest stars of the western regions. Although he had heard a lot about them, this was his first time meeting them in person. Feng Chongqing had an extremely ugly appearance, and his status was not as high as Wang Chong's, but Wang Chong did not look down on him in the slightest. On the contrary, he treated him with extreme respect. This was also why he had hurriedly dismounted and bowed upon seeing Feng Changqing. This was a loyal subject of the empire, one of the best in logistics and administration. Even Su Yiqin, who would later become the queen of logistics, had once said that she admired him immensely. It was precisely for this reason that bandits were running amok in Suiye that Wang Chong found it even more difficult to understand. Marquis might not know, but Anxi is currently plagued by internal and external threats. The Arabs have not only colluded with the Shi kingdom, but have also sent out many spies to bribe the Hu of Anxi, equipping them with horses and weapons so that they can stir up trouble in the rear and disrupt Anxi. In addition, the Anxi Protectorate army led by Lord Gao Xianji has been locked in a stalemate with the Arabs at Talas for 2 months. The people of the western regions are unsettled, and many small kingdoms and tribes of the western regions are taking advantage of the situation. Anxi is severely lacking in soldiers. The total number of soldiers doesn't even add up to 2,000, far from enough. What Marquis is seeing right now is the result of my doing all I can to maintain it. Otherwise, Suiye would have been even more chaotic. Feng Changqing had a haggard expression on his face. As one of the twin walls of the Tang dynasty, besides Gao Xianji, Feng Changqing was the most dazzling figure in all of Anxi. Feng Changqing truly could not escape the blame for Anxi's current state, but only Feng Changqing understood just how difficult his situation was. When the 36 kingdoms and tribes of the western regions were taking advantage of the chaos to rise up, the 2,000 soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army that had been left behind to guard the area was truly a single log. On the one hand, Feng Changqing was worried about the safety of Gao Xianji and the 30,000 soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army at Talas, and on the other hand, he had to do his utmost to maintain the stability of the western regions. So that's how it is. Wang Chong was also moved. He knew that Gao Xianji hadn't left many soldiers in the western regions, but Wang Chong had never imagined that there would only be 2,000 soldiers. Maintaining the safety of the vast western regions with such a small number of soldiers was practically impossible. In truth, the fact that Suiye, as the city closest to Talas, was still able to have so many merchants and still maintain order on the surface was a testament to Feng Changqing's astonishing abilities. Chen Bin, give Lord Feng Changqing 2,000 soldiers and equip them with crossbows and shields. In addition, I will give you 10 ballista teams. No matter what, Suiye must be stabilized. Wang Chong ordered without turning his head. Suiye was where the Anxi Protectorate was located. It was both the closest defensive fortress to Talas and the spiritual center of the western regions. If even the Anxi Protectorate Suiye fell into chaos, the entire western regions would truly be thrown into chaos. Thus, no matter what, Wang Chong had to stabilize the situation in Suiye and kill all the robbers. Yes, Marquis. Chen Bin's voice came from the rear, and then the sound of hooves galloping into the distance. Marquis, I can deal with the situation in Anxi for now, at least for the time being, but Lord Gao Xianji is in a dire situation. I'm afraid that he won't be able to hold on for much longer. I hope that Marquis can hurry up and reinforce Lord Protector General as soon as possible. Feng Changqing suddenly said, his eyes brimming with unease and anxiety. Lord Feng, don't be in such a rush. Just what is the situation at Talas? Wang Chong asked. Up until now, almost all the information on Talas had come from the Anxi Protectorate and Feng Changqing. No one knew the situation at Talas better than Feng Changqing, not even Jean Quebec. The situation at Talas is extremely bad. When the Arabs first arrived, they didn't have many soldiers or sufficient preparations, and there were no trees around Talas that could be cut down. But now, the Arabs are gathering more and more soldiers, and their attacks are getting fiercer and fiercer. Based on the information I've gathered, the Arabs are already cutting down trees in the rear and bringing them to the front lines, where they are building ladders and other construction equipment. This is clearly the intention of an all-out assault. In a few days at most, Talas won't be able to hold out. The Arabs are currently focusing all their attention on Talas. If Talas falls, Anshi will quickly fall. The entire western regions will fall into the hands of the Arabs. Feng Changqing's expression was extremely agitated. Marquis, Anshi and the Tang dynasty have no more soldiers to use. We can only rely on Milord. Changqing requests Marquis, no matter what, you must rescue Lord Protector General and the Anshi disciples in the city. Please. Chapter 876. Around Wang Chong, Li Sai, Su Shixian, Cheng Sanyuan, Zhang Ke, Sun Jiming, Chen Burang, and Zhuang Buping couldn't help but be moved by this sight. Feng Changqing's name was like a thunderclap to their ears. For many of them, he was a lofty and unreachable figure that they would never be able to come into contact with in their entire lives. But now, in front of so many people, Feng Changqing had put down his dignity and come to beg Wang Chong, who was far younger than him, in an extremely humble manner. This was a massive blow to all of them. But Feng Changqing seemed to not notice, and he continued to bow. The situation in the western regions was getting tenser and tenser, and after almost 2 months of darkness and despair, Wang Chong was the only hope he could see, the only chance of survival for the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army trapped at Talas. Lord Feng, be at ease. Although the Arabs are powerful, they are far from being invincible. To borrow the words of Han Great General Chen Tang, those who openly offend my mighty Han will be executed no matter how far away they are. The Tang dynasty is not weak, and the last thing the Arabian Empire should have done was collude with the Shi kingdom and covet Anshi. In this battle, I will not only rescue Lord Gao Xianji and the soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army, I will also make the Arabs pay the heaviest price for their recklessness. This is also the true reason I have come here. Wang Chong's eyes were bright as he slowly raised Feng Changqing up, his expression abnormally solemn. Each of Wang Chong's words was like a heavy weight, causing Feng Changqing and the surrounding Anshi Protectorate Army soldiers to tremble in shock. Feng Changqing had been bursting with anxiety and unease, and when he saw Wang Chong, his eyes turned red and tears almost came out. But at this moment, he inexplicably felt at ease. Slowly, Feng Changqing raised his head. For the first time, he was carefully examining the young Protector General before him. This was a youth of 16 or 17, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. It was easy to associate him with the scions of the great clans of the capital, but he exuded a steadiness that no scion of his age could possess. His expression was wise and his manner was calm, causing others to unconsciously pay attention to every word he said and deeply believe him. Not only that, but Feng Changqing could also sense an extremely strong military aura from him. He was no ordinary general, but a top-notch general who had been through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He had a wealth of battle experience and was extremely qualified. In his 10-some years in the Anshi Protectorate Army, he had only sensed this sort of aura on one person, Shi Protector General Gao Xianji. But not even Gao Xianji exuded such a thick aura of iron and blood. Feng Changqing had once looked down on Wang Chong, but he had also re-examined him. But in the end, Feng Changqing had realized that he had underestimated him. This youth was far stronger than he had imagined. Marquis speaks the truth. This one has made a slip of the tongue. With Marquis leading the mighty army of my Tang dynasty, Changqing is confident that the Arabs will never be able to get what they want. Changqing wishes Milord an early report of victory and a triumphant return. When the time comes, Changqing will definitely hold a banquet for Milord in the Protectorate headquarters to welcome you and celebrate your achievements. Feng Changqing's expression also turned serious, and he turned to the side of the road and once more gave a deep bow. It was the same bow, but the meaning behind it was completely different. I wish Milord an early report of victory and a triumphant return. Behind Feng Changqing, the 4 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army also bowed deeply. Wait for my news. Wang Chong only smiled. This time, he did not help Feng Changqing up. Mounting the white-hoofed shadow, he set off once more. His back was straight, and there was no reluctance in his eyes. "Pass on my order. All soldiers, move out. Speed up. Rumble." The army of more than 100,000 surged through the last stronghold of the Tang dynasty and toward Talas, which was nearly 1,000 li away. Behind him, only when the last soldier of the Qixi protectorate had left Suiye did Feng Changqing slowly raise his head. Under the setting sun, the more than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements were like a black flood, sweeping through the distance with unstoppable momentum. This sort of momentum, unstoppable and unstoppable, had been deeply imprinted into the minds of every Qixi soldier. But in Feng Changqing's mind, all he could think of was the confident and confident figure of that youth. It's true that 100 rumors are not as good as a meeting, and a meeting is far better than a reputation. In the past, it was me and Milord who underestimated Marquis. For the Tang dynasty to have Marquis is the fortune of Anxi, and the fortune of all the people of the world. I am confident that Marquis will definitely succeed in this battle. After leaving Suiye city, Zhao Fu found himself surrounded by mountains and valleys. There were no cities or villages, and the surroundings were completely desolate. "All soldiers, hear my order. Advance at full speed. Keep up. Don't fall behind. Hurry. Talas is in dire straits. Don't let the Arabs have their way." They passed through the precipitous Zhong Mountains, which looked like a giant coiled dragon, and followed the desolate mountain path west. The sounds of urging came one after another, and the entire army moved at an extremely high speed. Speed was of the essence in war, and birds were constantly flying back and forth above the army. Although they still hadn't reached Talas, they could already hear shouts in the distance. Although they couldn't see anything, everyone could imagine that hundreds of thousands of soldiers had gathered at Talas and were engaged in a fierce battle. Everyone's expression immediately tensed up. In the army, from top to bottom, all the generals' expressions were incomparably solemn as orders were passed down one after another. Even the Hu mercenaries, who spoke a different language from the Han, could feel the tense atmosphere. They all held their breaths, not daring to breathe too loudly. Not only that, a day later, a new order was issued. All the hooves of the horses were to be wrapped in cloth, and the mouths of the horses and livestock were to be covered with nets to prevent them from neighing or making any noise. The noise of the army of 100,000 was immediately reduced to a whisper, but in this silent environment, the atmosphere of war had only intensified. Although the higher-ups had not explicitly said it, even the slowest person could tell that an unprecedentedly fierce battle was imminent. 100 li. As they got closer and closer to Talas, the shouts grew louder and louder. 80 li. Talas was still nowhere to be seen, but the waves of noise completely drowned out the rumbling of the carriages and the marching of the army. 50 li. The army moved faster and faster, and on the horizon, one could faintly make out a mountain range. The mountains were lush, and although there were no abnormally tall trees due to the terrain, they were still covered in green vegetation. The Whitestone Ridge was the closest obstacle to Talas. Looking up from the Whitestone Ridge, one could already see a huge, majestic city protruding from the top of the mountain. Thick smoke billowed above the city, and flames soared into the sky, enveloping the entire sky. The atmosphere was getting tenser and tenser. The army of 100,000 had solemn expressions, none of them making a sound. Even the cattle, sheep, and other livestock that served as food for the army seemed to sense something, their mouths closed, their eyes brimming with unease. Hurry up. Order after order was issued, the supervisors and officers of the army of 100,000 frantically issuing orders. All of them could sense the atmosphere of war, their hands tightly gripping their weapons as they stared forward. All of them understood that the battlefield was over there, that the enemy was there. What awaited them next would surely be an unprecedented, most ruthless, and most intense battle. The gates of the Tang dynasty were right behind them, and the 30,000 soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate army were waiting for reinforcements. There was no path of retreat. 40 li. The tension in the air was so thick that it was suffocating. At the front of the army, Zhang Ke and the other members of the Eagle team had gathered together, all of them solemn. Ever since they had entered the western regions and formed this team, Zhang Ke and the others had experienced many aerial battles, including the battle at the Triangular Gap, the battle at the Qixi Armory, and the battle on the Turkic Steppe. Each time, they had returned victorious. But all of them understood that their opponents this time were completely different. They were far stronger than any of their previous opponents. Cavalry, infantry, and even the eagles in the sky. In their last few encounters, they had not managed to gain the slightest advantage. Get ready. Zhang Ke turned to look at the others, his gaze sweeping past each member of the Eagle team. I don't need to say more about how powerful the Arabs are. We only have one chance, and no matter what, we must win. Not a single one of them can escape. Understood. Everyone spoke successively. All of them were like bowstrings that had been pulled taut, and their expressions were extremely serious. Zhang Ke nodded and quickly turned to look at the western sky. His gaze swept over the sky again and again as if he was searching for something. After some time, screech. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the western skies. A moment later, massive Arabian hunting falcons, their eyes sharp and piercing, unfurled their massive wings and flew toward them. They're here. Move. Zhang Ke's pupils constricted, and the entire Eagle team tensed up. These were the hunting falcons that the Arabs had stationed on the perimeter. Although the Arabs were attacking Talas with all their might, they had never expected reinforcements to arrive. But like all imperial armies, the Arabs maintained a vigilant watch over their surroundings, even in the midst of fierce battle. Without the slightest hesitation, the scarred Eagle King Xiao Sha leaped from Zhang Ke's shoulder and shot into the air like an arrow. The battle could begin at any moment. Go. Chapter 877. Only the Arabs themselves knew just how great of a price they had paid in order to get a better understanding of the Arabs. 11 members of the Eagle team had died to the east of Talas, 20 to 30 eagles had died in battle, and even Xiao Sha had been heavily injured. But Zhang Ke had also succeeded in grasping some of the Arab patterns. The Arabs had a unique style of combat. The eagles in the air would often be very far away from the scouts on the ground, and the hunting falcons could scout for several dozen li. Whenever these Arabian hunting falcons encountered an enemy bird, one of them would immediately return to inform the scouts in the rear. In order to avoid being discovered by the Arabs, the scouts could only return to the ground. At this time, if they couldn't see any enemy in the air, the Arabian hunting falcons would continue forward, circling in the air to gather more information on the enemy before leaving. If they wanted to avoid being discovered by the Arabs and make preparations, they had to exterminate all of these enormous Arabian hunting falcons that were skilled in aerial combat. If they let even one escape, all their efforts would have been for naught. More than 100,000 Qixi reinforcements had traveled a great distance, and concealing their auras would be meaningless. One circle, only one circle. No matter what, we have to succeed. Zhang Ke looked nervously at the sky. The Arab army was currently spread out in all directions, and the west was only a part of it. This was the best chance for them. The entire Eagle team had been mobilized. This battle would determine the success or failure of the entire army, including the armies of Qixi and Anxi. As these thoughts flew through Zhang Ke's mind, the dense ranks of the Tang dynasty eagles clashed with the Arabian hunting falcons. Screech. A shrill cry resounded through the sky. Without any contact or probing, the eagles of both sides plunged into the fray and began a bitter slaughter. Feathers danced in the air and blood splattered everywhere. It wasn't just scattered blood, but blood that filled the sky from the very beginning. Bang! In a flash, an Arabian hunting falcon plummeted from the sky like a boulder, smashing into the hard ground of sand and smashing into a bloody mess of flesh and bones. Behind it, 2 or 3 great tang eagles crashed into the ground like raindrops. 5, 6, 7, 8, the battle was far more intense than they had imagined. The Arabian hunting falcons were far more vicious than they had imagined. Their beaks were like steel chisels, their claws like iron hooks, and every time they swooped down, they would tear away chunks of flesh and feathers. Each of the Arabian hunting falcons could fend off 2, 3, or even 4. Zhang Kei's eagle king Xiao Sha had been injured by these ferocious attacks. But this time, Zhang Kei and the eagle team had adopted a completely different tactic. Whoosh! Like a pack of wolves, 30 to 40 eagles lunged at an Arabian hunting falcon, pecking and clawing. In a single exchange, the enormous and vicious Arabian hunting falcon was surrounded and killed, its corpse plummeting from the sky. During this process, the entire eagle team was completely focused, completely ignoring the attacks of the other hunting falcons. No matter how they attacked, none of the eagles looked back, and none of them tried to escape. They endured the pain of surrounding a hunting falcon and then immediately moved on to the next. In these circumstances, the eagle team suffered particularly heavy losses. The eagles were covered in wounds so deep that their bones were visible, and they continued to drop to the ground like rain. Seeing this scene, the eyes of all the members of the eagle team turned red. They had spent a great deal of time training each eagle, and this was not just some simple training. It had also been built up with deep emotions. Each time an eagle fell, it felt like their hearts were being torn apart, but they could only bury this feeling deep in their hearts. 1, 2, 3. Zhang Kei's tactic was proving effective. In just a few seconds, a large number of Arabian hunting falcons were dropping from the sky. Not even the fiercest hunting falcon could stop the attacks of so many eagles, but Zhang Kei's heart was still tense. "We can't let them escape, we can't let them escape," Zhang Kei clenched his fists as he stared at the sky. No matter how many Arabian hunting falcons they killed, it was meaningless. The most important thing was to exterminate all the Arabian hunting falcons. If even one managed to escape, the operation would be a complete failure. In the sky, the number of Arabian hunting falcons continued to dwindle. In the face of the suicidal attacks of the eagles, the hunting falcons were finally afraid, some of them even screaming as they tried to turn and flee. Everyone's hearts leapt into their throats at this sight, and Zhang Kei's face paled. At this moment, a rock eagle lunged forward like a bolt of lightning, tearing apart the back of an Arabian hunting falcon with a single swipe of its claw and tossing it out of the sky. A second, a third, and a final Arabian hunting falcon tried to turn and attack, but it was swiftly killed by the other eagles. Bang! When the last Arabian hunting falcon crashed to the ground, the entire eagle team let out a cheer for the day. Little Shah! Little Shah! Little Shah! The rock eagle that had killed the last 3 Arabian hunting falcons was Zhang Kei's eagle king, Little Shah. Success! Zhang Kei mentally breathed a sigh of relief. The Arabs wouldn't be completely unaware, but killing these Arabian hunting falcons would at least buy Marquis and his army some time to speed up the operation. The rest is up to Huang Batian and the others. If they wanted to get close to the Arabs without being discovered, there were at least 2 obstacles. The first was the hunting falcons that the Arabs had scattered around the perimeter of the army, and then there were the scouts on the ground. Each hunting falcon corresponded to a scout on the ground. Although they had won this aerial battle, they could not let their guard down. The scouts on the ground would come to investigate if they noticed that the hunting falcons had disappeared, but this was not within the scope of Zhang Kei's abilities. Ready! A loud shout came from up ahead. Zhang Kei turned his head and saw that Huang Batian was riding a large reddish-brown horse, calling out to the elite scouts in preparation to move out. As they got closer and closer to Talas, the army began to move faster and faster. All of them knew that they didn't have much time left, and all of them were on edge. 30 li later, all the Arab scouts on the perimeter had been eliminated, giving Wang Chong and his more than 100,000 soldiers some time to march. 20 li. 15 li. 13 Li. The army could be discovered at any moment. Everyone was racing against time. Everyone understood that for every meter the army advanced, their chances of victory would increase by 1 point. All of them were silent, their expressions solemn. The only sounds were the uniform footsteps and the rumbling of wheels. Only the last step is left. In the rear of the army, Wang Chong rode his white-hoofed shadow, surrounded by many experts and generals. His sharp eyes were constantly peering into the distance. Whether it was Zhang Kei's Eagle team or Huang Boshan's scout team, everything was under his control. It was impossible for an army of 100,000 to remain undiscovered by the Arabs, but they could push the army to the closest point and gain the greatest advantage. Wang Chong had once used a model to study the terrain around Talas. Although the city of Talas was surrounded by a vast expanse of plains, to the northeast was a series of low hills. If they could reach those hills before the Arabs discovered them, they would be able to catch them off guard. A small ship could easily turn around, and a group of tensome soldiers could easily change their strategy. But when hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers were attacking the city of Talas, changing the direction of their assault was not so easy. This was also the opportunity for Wang Chong and his Qixi reinforcements. Rumble. At this moment, the earth quaked and the sky swayed as the thundering of hooves came from the opposite side of the army. At the same time, the galloping of hooves could be heard. Reporting. An Arab army of 7,000 to 8,000 has suddenly appeared in front of us and is heading toward us. Lord Protector General, how should we deal with them? The scout dismounted and kneeled on the ground, his expression extremely nervous. Wang Chong faintly smiled as he looked to the front. Behind the rolling hills, a cloud of dust soared into the sky, and within this cloud of dust, 7,000 to 8,000 Arabs formed into a black flood of steel that had suddenly appeared on the summit. In the end, we still found them. Wang Chong grinned, unconcerned. In the end, the Arabs were no weaklings. Although he had done his utmost to conceal himself and had used the sounds of battle to drown out the noise, the Arabs had still sensed something strange and sent an army to sweep the area. But just 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers is far from enough. The strategy from before was effective. Wang Chong had covered the horses and livestock with nets and cloth, causing the entire army to fall silent and mute. Only the sound of carriages could not be masked, but the road that Wang Chong was traveling along was the busy Silk Road, with all sorts of merchants coming and going. This sort of noise was far too normal, and the fact that his scouts had not reported back made it very difficult to arouse suspicion. Wang Chong had thought this through meticulously. And the final result was already before his eyes. Although the Arabs had heard the noise, they had clearly believed that not many people had come, so they had only sent 7,000 to 8,000 cavalry to investigate. Clang! With a clear cry, Wang Chong unsheathed his sword, a 4-foot-long Wuxia steel sword that seemed to block out even the sunlight, its sharp edge gleaming with a cold light. All soldiers, hear my order. Advance at full speed. As he spoke, Wang Chong raised his sword and pointed it toward the distant hills. Chapter 878. Rumble. The Arab cavalry in the distance began to grow restless as the army charged. Bastard! How could there be so many Tang people? Why haven't we received any news? On a distant hill, a furious roar in Arabic resounded through the air as a heavily armored Arab general glared at the vast army before him, his face contorting in shock. Translated by Hypersheep 325. The order he had received was that an army of around 20,000 to 30,000 soldiers was heading toward Talas. Although he could not be sure if it was the Tang dynasty's army, his superiors had still dispatched a force of 7,000 to 8,000 cavalry to investigate. The Arabian Empire was a country of war, and all its subjects, from top to bottom, were seasoned warriors. A force of 7,000 to 8,000 cavalry equipped with the strongest Arabian steeds on the continent was enough to deal with 60,000 to 70,000 soldiers, but the enemy army was far larger than that. The Arabs had never shied away from battle, but the army they were facing was no ordinary army. The stern and imposing aura and the sharp aura it exuded indicated that this was an army that had been through many battles, the elite of the elite. Only a madman would use 7,000 soldiers to deal with an army of more than 100,000. Retreat! Retreat! Quickly! Someone! Report to Lord Governor! Screams resounded through the heavens as the 7,000 Arab cavalry fell into panic and began to retreat. In front of them, the more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements were surging toward them with thunderous speed. In a place 7 or 8 li from Talas, the low hills faintly swayed in the cold wind, causing the weeds at the top of the hills to sway. Although the nearby Talas had long ago become a sea of blood and mountains of corpses, this place was completely silent, as if time had stopped. Kayil! Kayil! At this moment, a shrill cry pierced through the sky and broke the silence of the entire area. Run! The Tang army is here! Amidst these shouts, the Arab cavalry began to pour down the hills, their faces filled with fear as they madly fled toward Talas. This sudden change quickly attracted the attention of the distant battlefield. The Arab army on the easternmost side of the battlefield was the first to notice. What happened? Isn't this Abdullah's army? Didn't they just set off? Why did you come back? Bastard! Why are they in such a mess? What scared them so much? Some of the Arab soldiers immediately began to curse at the panicked cavalry. Arabia was a country of war and revered courage. Those who refused to retreat and persisted in fighting on the front lines would always be the people most revered by the army. Those who panicked and ran away in fear would forever be the target of disdain. Quick, inform the governor. The Tang army is here. The reinforcements of the Tang dynasty are here. The Arab horseman at the very front ignored the curses of his men and used all the strength in his body to madly shout at the Arab horseman from afar. Absurd! However, his hoarse warning was met with a stern rebuke. The army parted, and a fierce-looking Arab general, clad in heavy armor and riding a divine steed, rode out from the ranks. His right hand held the scimitar at his waist, and he seemed to seethe with killing intent. The most elite army of the Tang dynasty is here. What other formidable army does Anshi have? Even if the Tang dynasty really did send reinforcements, what's there to be afraid of? We've gathered more than 300,000 soldiers. Lord Governor has already given the order that anyone who dares to retreat on the battlefield will be immediately executed. Are these scoundrels seeking death? As the strongest existence on the continent, Arabia had already subdued several dozen countries of various sizes on its borders. And in this battle, the Arabian Empire had gathered more than 300,000 elite soldiers near Talas. What could possibly threaten them at this time? What could possibly make them panic? But a moment later, the Arab general found himself unable to continue. The hills behind the fleeing Arab cavalry began to rumble and tremble as if they were being shaken by a pair of invisible hands. The trembling was not very loud at first, but as time went on, the trembling grew more and more intense. Even the earth and the battlefield of Talas began to shake. What's going on here? The Arab general slightly grimaced. This was definitely not the work of those 7,000 or 8,000 soldiers. With just 7,000 or 8,000 people, it was impossible to create such a huge commotion. This disturbance was the work of an army of at least 100,000 soldiers. Buzz! A moment later, Ney's horse neighed, and as the Arab general and countless Arab soldiers watched, a black dragon-patterned war banner slowly rose from the hills. Accompanying this war banner was an abnormally large and majestic horseman. 1 horse, 2 horses, 3 horses. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of cavalrymen had appeared at the top of the hills. They covered almost every corner of the crowd's field of vision, and their numbers were increasing at an extremely fast rate. These horsemen did not pursue the Arab horsemen in front of them, nor did they speak. All of them were coldly gazing in the direction of Talas. These horsemen were facing off against the countless Arabs, and in the blink of an eye, an indescribable and suffocating pressure had enveloped the battlefield. For a moment, the entire battlefield was eerily still, even the sounds of fighting becoming much quieter. The Tang people, the easternmost Arab general, gulped and subconsciously took a step back, a hint of fear in his eyes. He was definitely not a weak-willed person, but the pressure this army gave him was too great. Tens of thousands of soldiers didn't say a word and just stood there silently. Their disdainful gazes and disdainful auras were like mountains pressing down on everyone's hearts, making it hard for them to breathe. Impossible. How could the Tang dynasty still have such a powerful army? The Arab general's eyes were as wide as saucers, not daring to believe his own eyes. Wang, it was also at this moment that a strange feeling welled up in their hearts. At the very center of the hills, the army parted like a tide, and a massive silver-white dragon-patterned banner suddenly rose up from behind the hills, appearing before everyone's eyes. Beneath the banner, the Arab general finally saw the commander of the Tang dynasty. This was a thin youth riding a divine steed with hooves as white as snow. His eyes were filled with disdain, and his entire body exuded a radiant light. On his left and right side, a powerful general accompanied him like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon. "We've finally arrived." Wang Chong stopped at the top of the hill and looked into the distance. After more than 5 days of trudging, they had finally arrived at the city of Talas. From the top of the hill, one could see the smoke of beacons and blazing fires. Arab soldiers and banners were everywhere. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen such a large Arab army. Unlike the Mengshi Zhao people, the Arabs had much larger bodies, and unlike the Yuzhan people, the Arabs were more aggressive. When tens of thousands of Arabs gathered together in the form of an army, they exuded an aura that no other faction or army around the Tang dynasty could compare to. Flames. Black flames that could incinerate all things and invade all. This was what Wang Chong felt when he stood on the summit and saw the Arab army. These tens of thousands of Arab soldiers were like a vast ocean, encircling the city of Talas. This famed fortress of the Silk Road had long ago lost its former grandeur, and all its walls were in tatters. Fresh blood flowed down from the city walls, dyeing the outer walls of this military town a dark red color. The sky was aflame, roiling flames covering the walls. From the summit, Wang Chong could smell the thick stench of blood wafting from the distance. In the rear of the Arab army, catapults were still hurling massive boulders into the walls of Talas. Accompanying these catapults were countless Arab soldiers with scimitars in their mouths, rapidly climbing up the scaling ladders on the outer wall. The battle for the city of Talas had reached its most critical juncture. After 2 months of fighting, the Anshi Protectorate army in the city had reached its limit. Wang Chong could see a steady stream of Arab soldiers climbing up the walls. Outside the massive gate, a massive battering ram more than 100 zhang long and so large that it would take several men to encircle it was madly battering at the gate. The thick steel gate was already severely deformed and would not be able to last for much longer. Feng Chongqing was right. The Arabs really have launched an all-out attack. Wang Chong only slightly creased his brow as he looked into the distance, and then he paid it no more mind. No matter what the Arabs were planning, the moment he had appeared here, everything had been decided. He wanted this city of Talas to become the place where the Arabs suffered their most grievous setback. With this thought in mind, Wang Chong's gaze quickly followed the scaling ladders to the top of the walls of Talas. At the most illustrious place on the walls of Talas, Wang Chong finally saw that imposing figure whose name resounded through the entire western regions. Standing on the high walls, this figure was constantly cutting down the Arab soldiers climbing up the scaling ladders, roaring as he commanded the other soldiers. His armor was stained red, and there was not a single spot on it that was clean. Gao Xianji's figure was deeply rooted in the wall, seemingly one with the earth. From a distance, he appeared like a giant. No matter how many Arab soldiers charged at him, no matter how powerful their charge, they would always be stopped in front of him, forever unable to break through. Around him, Wang Chong could also see the countless figures of the Anxi Protectorate army engaged in fierce battle. After several months of fighting, all of them had reached the limits of their physical strength. They were so exhausted that they seemed ready to collapse at any moment. But a pride ingrained in their bones continued to support them as they tirelessly fought on the walls. No one knew how long they could last, but each of them was using their own methods to persevere. Chapter 880. Impossible. How could there be such powerful cavalry from the east? In the rear of the formation, Umar's pupils constricted, and he almost stopped breathing. The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry he had dispatched were the elite force under his command. They had followed him through many campaigns, suppressing many rebellions and conquering ancient civilizations like the Sassanid dynasty. However, Umar had never thought that such a skilled cavalry would be defeated by the cavalry from the east. They were not a match for them at all. "Everyone, follow me." At almost the same time, Sun Jiming roared from the rear of the Wuxian cavalry. Taking advantage of the moment when the Arab cavalry had been scattered, he ordered the nearly 10,000 Qishi cavalry to plunge into the gaps in the Arab cavalry like a massive saber. Under the charge of Sun Jiming's cavalry, the scattered Arab cavalry became even more disorderly. On the other side, Chen Burang, Zhuang Buping, Qi Weisi, and the other future generals of Deflecting Blade Manor were also leading the cavalry of the Annam Protectorate and the other mercenaries in the charge. After more than a year of bitter training, these people had not yet reached the level of strength equivalent to Li Sai or Su Hanshan, but the insight, knowledge, and skill in the art of war that they had gained from their time with Wang Chong had slowly matured, and they were beginning to show the embryonic forms of these future generals. From this aspect, the insight, knowledge, and skill they had displayed on the battlefield were far more effective than their individual strengths. This was also why Wang Chong had called them out of Deflecting Blade Manor. Bang bang bang. The army continued to charge, choosing to strike at the weakest points of the Arab army, the most lethal points. The art of war is the art of chess. After training in Deflecting Blade Manor for so long, Sun Jiming, Chen Burang, and the others had all gained a systematic understanding of the art of war under Wang Chong's tutelage. They had also developed an extremely keen sense for opportunities. One war Saint Wang Chong was hard enough to deal with, and with these future generals, an army of 100,000 could display an unimaginable power. This was the most valiant and most extravagant army of the Tang dynasty. Boom boom boom. Screams and collisions filled the air as the tens of thousands of scattered Arab cavalry were torn to pieces. Even though the Arabs were tall and innately skilled in battle, war had never been fought by individuals, but by groups. Once the Arabs were cut up into small groups, no matter how strong they were, it was meaningless. Bang bang bang. One Arab horseman after another was pierced through from multiple directions, falling from their horses and dying on the ground. In just a few seconds, the Arabs had lost 17 to 18,000 soldiers, a speed that left everyone alarmed. When these tactical generals of Deflecting Blade Manor were paired with a future invincible great general like Li Sai, the power of this arrow formation was unimaginable. Neigh. The neighing of horses resounded through the battlefield. While Sun Jiming's cavalry were repeatedly cutting through the Arab cavalry, Li Sai had already pierced through the Arab cavalry formation. The massive Fergana horse carried Li Sai like a bolt of white silk as it crashed into the Arab shield men at the very back. Careful! Raise the shields! Stop those Tang people! Kill them! Kill them! Those who retreat will die! A series of urgent voices resounded throughout the battlefield, revealing a strong sense of panic. Boom boom boom. On the eastern edge of Talas, countless Arab shield-bearers gathered all their strength to hold up their massive shields. But the only response they received was the clattering of metal, clang. Li Sai swung his massive Wuxia steel sword, cleaving the massive Arab shield in front of him and the shield men behind it in two. Seeing this scene, everyone's eyes were filled with fear. The Arabian Empire was a country of war, and all its armor and weapons were forged to the highest standards. The heavy shields distributed to the infantry were all forged from the finest quality of black iron. This material could not only block the full-strength charge of cavalry, but it was also extremely tough. Even the sharpest Arabian saber would find it difficult to scratch it. It was a well-known name in the western regions. No one had expected that this giant Tang general would be able to cleave it in two like it was made of paper with a single blow of his sword. No matter what price we have to pay, stop him. Axe men, shield men, archers, hurry. Don't let him get close. The entire Arab infantry formation was thrown into chaos. Li Sai's godlike stance and divine power had left all of them stunned. Countless soldiers raised their shields and swarmed over from all directions, wanting to block Li Sai and the opening. However, it was too late. Charge! The tens of thousands of Wuxian cavalry followed closely behind Li Sai, their Wuxia steel swords slashing down on these famed Arab shields. Li Sai had only opened a small opening, but the moment the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry charged in, this small opening immediately became a massive gap, throwing the entire army into chaos. Cavalry reigned supreme in the world and were the most powerful of all soldiers. No infantry without a shield to slow them down could possibly stop cavalry at their top speed. No matter how formidable the Arab infantry was or how skilled the Arabs were in battle, it was all the same. Boom boom boom. The charge of the 5,000 fully armored Wuxian cavalry threw the Arab infantry formation into disarray. The Wuxian cavalry were the strongest cavalry in the history of the Tang dynasty, the #1 cavalry in the world. On this foreign battlefield, they had finally displayed their unparalleled strength. Even the warlike Arabs were incapable of stopping the charge of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. 10 charges, 10 victories. Li Sai's voice thundered through the sky. Boom! The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry scattered like flowers scattered by a celestial maiden. The collapse, which had been limited to the area around the gap, instantly expanded by 10 times, and it was still spreading. No! Deep within the army, the Arabian spear Umar trembled in shock at this sight, his entire face paling. As a famed general of Arabia, Umar had subdued countless opponents, but none of them had given him such an intense pressure and threat as the Tang dynasty cavalry before him. For the first time, Umar felt the aura of death. Although there were still more than 40,000 soldiers around him, they gave him no sense of security. The Mamelukes. Only the Mamelukes can deal with them. A thought flashed through Umar's mind, and at this moment, he thought of the most powerful and terrifying Mamelukes of the empire. Only the Mamelukes were capable of crushing the Arab cavalry into such a state. All soldiers, hear my order. Focus your attacks on the Tang people. Although he was intensely shocked, Umar still did not give up, much less admit defeat. As the illustrious Arabian spear, Umar had always been known for his toughness and tenacity. No matter how powerful his opponent was, Umar would never retreat. He would only have one choice: thoroughly defeat them. 23rd Shield Man Unit, 24th, 25th, and 27th Shield Man Units, charge forward and stop their battle. 7th Infantry Unit, 9th Infantry Unit, 10th Infantry Unit, all lines, advance. Everyone, no matter the cost, we must stop those Tang people. Umar straightened his back, his gaze sharp, and a series of orders came out of his mouth. The entire army swiftly began to move in accordance with his orders. In all of the Arabian East, only Umar could think clearly and methodically in the face of the charge of the Wuxian cavalry. As one of the top-class Arab generals, Umar was well aware that while there were fierce soldiers, there were no invincible soldiers. Not even the strongest Mamelukes of the Abbasid Caliphate were omnipotent. The most frightening aspect of cavalry was their speed. If he could slow down the speed of a cavalry charge, then no matter what kind of cavalry they would be no different from ordinary infantry. If he couldn't slow them down, then he would use human lives to make up for it. This was the simplest strategy Umar had in mind. Roar! For General Umar! For the Empire. Countless savage faces appeared around him. The ferocity of the Wuxian cavalry had not only failed to force the Arabian army to retreat, but only stimulated their fighting spirit and killing intent. Countless Arabs surged forward. The Arabs' belligerence and savagery were on full display at this moment. The Tibetans were warlike as well, but they paled in comparison to the Arabs. They were on completely different levels. The Uzan had a limit to their belligerence, and their belligerence was buried in their blood, but the Arabs had no limit. Their belligerence was buried deep in their bones. The two were on completely different levels. Chapter 881. The 7th Infantry Platoon, the 9th Infantry Platoon, the 10th Infantry Platoon. These were the most elite infantrymen trained by Umar. They were also Umar's personal guards. On the battlefield, they also had another function, which was to undertake the task of attacking the enemy. The Arabs dominated the world through cavalry, but they had also researched ways to restrain cavalry. Because the Arabs were far from the only ones who had cavalry and trained them. The 7th, 9th, and 10th infantry platoons were the elites that Umar had picked out. On the battlefield, they had killed countless elite forces of enemy nations, including cavalry and infantry. The army was being mobilized, and the soldiers were being rapidly rotated. An invisible net of death was closing in on the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry from all sides. But this was not the end of it. As a famous general, Umar's forte was not as simple as defense. The 30th Cavalry Formation, the 33rd Cavalry Formation, the 40th Cavalry Formation, the 50th Cavalry Formation, the 80th Cavalry Formation. Attack with all your might. Crush their left and right wings. Crush them completely. Umar's eyes were cold and merciless as he quickly locked onto the left and right flanks of the Chishi reinforcements. Avoiding the enemy's strength and striking the weak was not a principle that only the Tang people of the Central Plains understood. The Arabs might not have been skilled in the art of war, but Umar had long ago understood this simple principle that he had fumbled through countless bloody battles. This cavalry of the Tang people was indeed very powerful, but not all of the Tang people's armies were like that. As long as they avoided the Tang dynasty cavalry and defeated the main force in the rear, no matter how powerful the Tang people were, the final victor would still be the Arabs. Not only that, even though the Tang people on the other side were overwhelming and there were many of them, Umar only needed to buy time in terms of strategy. More than 300,000 Tang elites had gathered on the battlefield of Talas. No matter how many soldiers the Tang dynasty had, in the end, once the 300,000 soldiers had gained enough time to turn around, the 100,000 some Tang dynasty soldiers would still be dead. Boom! The earth rumbled and shuddered. Umar had barely spoken when the 15,000 Arab cavalry in the rear of the Arab camp split into two groups, one on the left and one on the right, charging out from behind the shield wall like two black storms. Black halos vibrated beneath their feet as the 15,000 Arab cavalry moved with godlike speed. In just a few moments, they had reached their maximum speed. 3,000 zhang passed in a flash. This time, the 15,000 cavalry perfectly circled around the Wuxian cavalry, Sun Jiming, and Chen Burang, charging straight for the Chishi army in the rear. Infantry. In front of the charging cavalry, they were just lambs waiting to be slaughtered. In the history of cavalry versus infantry, infantrymen were rarely able to win. A fully armored cavalry could crush an infantry force 5, 6, or even more than 10 times its size. The Arabs were the fiercest of cavalry, and they had destroyed countless infantry opponents. Kill them. Destroy their formation and tear them to shreds. For Arabia. Kill these infidels. Hooves thundered as the 15,000 Arab cavalry galloped toward the rear of the great Tang army, their black halos rumbling like thunder. 150 zhang, 150 zhang, 150 zhang, they were getting closer and closer, and they could even see the soldiers on the transport carriages hurriedly coming to a stop and taking up formation. But it was too late. This sort of reaction was useless against the lightning-fast Arab cavalry, who had experienced countless battles. Kill them all. Savage bellows resounded through the heavens as the 15,000 Arab cavalry began their final charge. Ready! Ready! At almost the same time, a loud shout resounded over the earth as silver-white carriages were pushed out from the Tang camp, each carriage flanked by at least 5 Tang infantry. And in front of these infantry, Chen Bin had unsheathed his wood steel sword and raised it high, pointing it forward. His eyes were cold and his body straight, his hand gripping his sword as if it had been frozen in place. 40 zhang. 30 zhang. Fire. At the last moment, Chen Bin swung down his sword. With Chen Bin's order, the hundreds of small carriages in the army began to move. Boom! 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 In that instant, the heavens and the earth fell silent. Everyone could hear thunderous booms in their ears. Those were the notes of death. In the next moment, under the gazes of countless people, crossbow bolts more than 3 meters long and covered in inscriptions suddenly shot out from the small cars like a waterfall. Careful! It's ballista bolts. At the sight of these ballista bolts, the eyes of the Arab horsemen at the very front widened and they almost stopped breathing. An intense fear engulfed them, and they began to pull on their reins to stop, but it was too late. Boom! A thick ballista bolt pierced through the first Arab warhorse, and then the second, the third. These famed Arab warhorses were all covered in thick armor that ordinary arrows could not pierce through, but in the face of the most formidable ballista bolts of the Tang dynasty, they were as useless as paper. Boom! 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 Hundreds of ballista bolts shot through the air, each one piercing through 4 or 5 Arab horsemen. Some of the more powerful bolts even pierced through 7 or 8 horsemen in a straight line. Neighing filled the air as the Arabs lost at least 5 or 6,000 men in a single clash. Despite being hit by the bolts, the inertia of the Arab horsemen allowed them to continue forward, gliding over the ground for a long distance, even reaching the ballista at the very front. But by then, they were already dead. Release. Chen Bin's eyes were fixed on the Arab horseman, and he swung down his Wuxia steel sword once more. Boom boom boom. A second volley of ballista bolts exploded into a cloud of dust. Release. A third volley of ballista bolts followed, each one like the scythe of the Grim Reaper, each aimed at an Arab horseman. After 3 volleys of ballista bolts, the fates of the 15,000 Arab horsemen were sealed. The vast battlefield was littered with the corpses of warhorses and Arab cavalry. After the 3 volleys of ballista bolts, the rumbling of hooves and the thunderous roars of fighting had vanished without a trace. Blood flowed everywhere on the ground, and the gurgling sound could be heard clearly. Silence. For a moment, the entire battlefield was eerily still, as if even the sounds of fighting had been silenced. In the distance, the Arab soldiers stared at the corpses strewn across the ground, their eyes wide with fear. These 15,000 valiant and famed Arab cavalry had defeated countless opponents many times their size and subdued many powerful foes. At their maximum speed, each one of them could deal with 4 or 5 infantry at the very least. Before setting off, all of them believed that they could kill several times their number of Tang people and completely break through their formation. But none of them had expected that after 3 volleys of ballista bolts, they would completely vanish. Never in the history of the Arabs had they encountered such a thing. At that moment, all of them felt a suffocating pressure. Even Umar's face had turned pale. Advance. Chen Bin's eyes were unperturbed by the sight of 15,000 Arab cavalry falling to his ballistae. With a wave of his sword, 3,000 silver carts pushed 3,000 ballistae over the corpses of the Arab cavalry and began to advance. On their left and right, the other Chishi reinforcements were also stepping over the corpses of the Arab cavalry and surging forward. Kill. Ready. At the same time, Umar unsheathed his sword. Even though he had lost 2 groups of cavalry and nearly 30,000 soldiers, Umar had not given up. He was still trying to buy time for the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers. Battle was not just about tactics, but also strategy. No matter how powerful the Tang people's army was, as long as the 300,000 Arab soldiers could turn around, the only thing awaiting the Tang people would be death. Rumble. The army was getting faster and faster, the distance between the two sides shrinking. This time, without the Arab cavalry, there were no more obstacles between the Chishi reinforcements and the vast Arab army. Finally, boom. There was a heaven-shaking boom as the earth quaked. If one looked down from the sky, they would see the two armies colliding like a tide. At that moment, the entire battlefield of Talas shuddered, and even the earth seemed to be on the verge of being torn apart. Fist against fist, flesh against flesh, warhorse against warhorse, saber against sword, all of them fiercely clashed on the battlefield. There were no tricks in this battle. Everyone was putting all their strength into it. This was the largest and most intense battle between the East and the West. Hold! For the Empire! Stop these infidels! At the very front of the eastern battlefield, the Arab shield men were putting their lives on the line to stop the Tang army. Their teeth were clenched, their powerful shoulders pushing up against the 7-foot-tall shields. Bang bang bang. A storm of attacks came from the other side. The 7-foot-tall giants fiercely trembled, but they were able to firmly block the attacks. They were already very experienced in dealing with this sort of attack. A single giant shield could block the attacks of 4 or 5 opponents of the same level, and it was an important tool for the Arabs to use against the cavalry and infantry of other factions. In actual combat, even the cavalry of the Arabs would find it very difficult to break through this barrier. Hold! General has already given the order. As long as we can hold on for a little longer, once the army has finished adjusting, we can completely annihilate them. The Arab shield men roared, their bodies leaning forward, their feet digging deep into the earth as if they were one with it. But at this moment, boom! The earth quaked as invisible ripples of wind swept out from the rear of the Tang people's army, instantly engulfing the entire Arab army. Before the Arab soldiers on the eastern side of the battlefield could react, clang clang clang. The halos beneath their feet began to shudder, and their energy began to drop 3 levels as if shackles had been placed on them. Chapter 882. What's going on here? Everyone paled in fright. No one knew what was going on, but a decisive change had already taken place on the battlefield. Boom! 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 Like a dam bursting, the entire eastern battlefield crumbled. Under the effects of the 3 bane of the battlefield halos, the strength of the Arab soldiers plummeted. They were simply no match for the Tang soldiers. Bang! 4 or 5 Tang dynasty infantry, their stellar energy vibrating, fiercely collided with a massive Arab shield in front of them. This unbreakable shield was instantly sent flying, and even the Arab soldier behind it was knocked to the ground. Squelch! Before the Arab shield man could get up, a spear shot forward like a snake, piercing through the soldier's throat and pinning him to the ground. Over his corpse, the Tang dynasty soldiers surged forward. At the same time, there was a burst of bloody light as a seemingly invincible Arab leader was instantly run through by a sword. As he stared at the sword hilt in front of him, this bearded Arab leader's eyes went wide in fear. His hand subconsciously gripped the hilt of his sword as he fell to the ground like a wooden pillar. Even in death, he still didn't understand what had happened. Why had his strength dropped so much that he had been killed by a single sword strike? 1, 2, 3. In a few short moments, tens of thousands of Arabs had fallen. Boom boom boom. At almost the same time, the ballista army under Chen Bin's command arrived, firing volley after volley of ballista bolts into the Arab camp. In order to defend against the attacks of the Tang dynasty, the Arab soldiers on the eastern battlefield had arranged themselves in extremely tight formations. This was the defensive formation they were most proud of, but it was now the perfect target for the Tang dynasty ballista bolts, even more advantageous than when they were dealing with the cavalry. Plush plush plush. Each ballista bolt pierced through 10 some Arab soldiers, some even piercing through 30 some in a straight line. In a few short moments, the 3,000 ballista soldiers had become a vast field of death. At least 10,000 Arab soldiers had fallen to this volley of ballista bolts. In the face of this dreadful rain of death and the sight of their comrades falling like dominoes, even the strong-willed and innately warlike Arabs could sense the thick stench of death and began to retreat in fear. Kill! For the Tang dynasty! Meanwhile, far away, Li Sai's 5,000 Wuxian cavalry were rampaging through the depths of the Arab camp, stabbing back and forth. Under the control of Li Sai and his 5,000 Wuxian cavalry, the 10 charges 10 victories formation was being pushed to its limit. One moment, they would scatter like fireworks, and the next, they would gather together like an iron claw. After a few rounds of charging, the surrounding Arab soldiers were left in disarray. Clang clang clang. One giant axe after another slammed into Li Sai's body with thunderous force. The 7th, 9th, and 10th infantry units under Umar's command had made Li Sai their primary target, but all their attacks were fiercely repelled by Li Sai. Swish! Li Sai swung his sword, causing the golden helmets around him to fly into the air. Those great Tang elites who had lost their heads only trembled a few times before collapsing to the ground. Everyone, follow me! Kill them all! Li Sai's furious roar thundered in the ears of all the Wuxian cavalry. Bang bang bang. In just a few charges, the 7th, 9th, and 10th infantry units had been obliterated like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. The formidable strength of the Wuxian cavalry, coupled with Wang Chang's bane of the battlefield halo, caused all the Arab infantry to fall into disarray. Tens of thousands of Arabs fell to the hooves of the Wuxian cavalry. In the face of the overwhelming strength of the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry and their furious charge, their tenacity and viciousness instantly crumbled. Run! Wave after wave of Arab soldiers charged forward, only to be pulverized by the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry. In the face of the power of the Wuxian cavalry, the Arabs finally began to tremble in fear and turn to flee. The ballista army, the Wuxian cavalry, the bane of the battlefield halo, and the more than 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty. The Arab army collapsed like a landslide. In a few short moments, tens of thousands of Arab infantry had fallen in fear on the eastern battlefield. Even more Arab soldiers began to flee as if they were running from the plague. This was the first time in the history of the Arabs that they had encountered such an unstoppable force. In the face of this overwhelming power, all the Arab soldiers felt a fear that came from the depths of their souls. The entire army fell into panic, and the collapse and chaos began to spread from the Eastern army under Umar's control to the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers behind him. Bastard! Stop! Anyone who dares to run will be dealt with according to military law. You cowards are a disgrace to the empire. Umar's face was pale, his entire body trembling in anger. His original intention had been to stabilize the army and stop the sudden appearance of this Tang army. In Umar's plan, he only needed to wait a little longer for the entire army to press forward and wipe out this army of the Tang dynasty. But now, before the rear of the army had finished reorganizing, the eastern army had been attacked by the Tang dynasty army and was now charging at his own army. This was the exact opposite of what Umar had intended. Bang! Seeing that his army was out of control, Umar finally clenched his teeth and galloped forward. With a wave of his scimitar, 10 some Arab soldiers were cleaved in half by Umar's scimitar. Bang! Bang! Umar turned around and galloped again, and another 10 some Arab soldiers were mowed down like weeds. After several charges, Umar was surrounded by mountains of corpses and seas of blood. More than 100 Arab soldiers had fallen, but this Arab arrowhead didn't even bat an eyelid, his expression cold and callous. Under this cruel and iron-blooded method, the collapse of the surrounding army finally showed signs of stopping. However, before Umar could gather his entire army, he suddenly heard a loud neigh. At the same time, Umar sensed a powerful aura that resembled a storm rushing towards him at an alarming speed. The Tang people. Umar's heart chilled as the image of a giant riding a Fergana horse appeared in his mind, one that was even taller than the tallest Arab. It was the cavalry leader of the Tang dynasty. Buzz! Umar's pupils constricted, and he turned his head to see Li Sai leaping into the air with his horse, charging towards him like a shocking rainbow. His powerful hands held a huge sword that was even taller than a person, and he swung it down viciously. Foreign thief, hand over your life. Li Sai's eyes widened in anger. He condensed his violent gang energy to the extreme and slashed with his sword with the force of a thunderbolt. Boom! In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, there was a flash of light, and in the next moment, a deep, dark, and incomparably powerful force erupted from Umar's body. This stellar energy was suffused with a thick scent of iron and fire, and it fiercely blocked Li Sai's all-out attack. Ignorant infidel, I will personally end your life. Umar's eyes exploded with a frightening cold light. As one of the best generals under Governor Abu Muslim's command, Umar himself possessed an extremely formidable fighting force. His strength was just as famous as his callousness and ruthlessness. Although his army had been routed, Umar had never been afraid of a battle between generals. In these fierce battles, he had slain countless enemy generals. Umar was known as the Arab Archangel precisely because he had used the blood of these generals to forge his name. But at this moment, the air shuddered as a sonorous voice came from overhead. You bearded bastard, what are you blabbering about? Listen. No. Understand. Before he could even finish his sentence, a huge fist made of rock appeared in front of his eyes, growing larger and larger. It fiercely smashed into Umar's head. The enormous force caused the stellar energy around Umar to shudder, and even the 4 legs of his Arabian steed sank into the earth. In the face of the combined attack of Li Sai and Huang Batian, even Umar felt an enormous pressure. It's useless. None of you can kill me. Umar clenched his teeth, a savage light in his eyes. After blocking the attacks of these 2 top-class generals of the Tang dynasty, it was time for him to counterattack. But just as Umar gathered his stellar energy and raised his scimitar, there was a rumble. Without any warning, the ground beneath Umar's feet seemed to come to life. Under the control of an external force, the hard ground caved in and split apart. Umar's warhorse instantly lost its balance, and Umar and his horse plummeted to the ground. Huang Boshan's stone general ability was capable of shaking the earth and tearing it apart. Not good. Umar, who had been calm all this while, turned pale with fright, and his expression finally changed. But this was not the end. A moment later, a dark red ripple erupted from the rear of the Tang dynasty army and swept across the battlefield. Umar's steel-like aura suddenly shuddered as he was shaken by this force, and his aura abruptly dropped. The Bane of Generals Halo. Chapter 883. A good chance. Sensing that Umar's aura had suddenly weakened, Li Sai and Huang Boshan's eyes brightened and they joined forces to attack. At almost the same time, the galloping hooves of horses thundered in from all directions. Bang bang bang. The 5,000 Wuxian cavalry were like a torrential storm, crashing into Umar's stellar energy barrier. In the blink of an eye, Umar's energy was being consumed at an incredible rate, and it was rapidly weakening to an unbelievable level. 10 charges 10 victories. When the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry used one of the 10 most powerful formations of the world on a single person, not even a renowned Arab general like Umar had any chance of escaping. No. Umar, famed for his heart of stone and his will, paled as an intense fear gripped his heart. His martial arts were fierce and majestic, enough to simultaneously block the combined attacks of Li Sai and Huang Batian. But when thousands of Wuxian cavalry charged together, not even Umar was a match. In his life of battle, this was the first time he had encountered such a large group of cavalry attacking a single person. No matter how powerful a single person was, they could not simultaneously deal with thousands of opponents. At this moment, he finally sensed the scent of death. He wanted to mount and flee, but the stone general controlled by Huang Batian had taken complete control of the surrounding terrain. Boulders protruded from the ground and blocked his path, and the dense barrage of attacks from the 5,000 Wuxian cavalry sealed off his path of retreat. Ah! Boom! At the last moment, Umar only had time to muster all his strength and raise his famed Arabian scimitar to block the attack coming from above. Boom! A massive and sharp sword, taller than a man, furiously slashed down, cleaving through the dark clouds, cleaving through the sun and moon, cleaving through the pitch-black stellar energy around Umar's body. At the same time, it cleaved through the famed Arabian divine saber that had accompanied Umar for half his life. Ney's final neigh came from Umar's Arabian steed. Together with Umar, this stalwart steed was cleaved in two by Li Sai's Wuxia steel sword, its blood spraying the ground. To make an enemy of the Tang dynasty, so be it. Li Sai picked up Umar's corpse with his sword and lifted it high into the air. In that instant, his aura surged, and his astral energy surged like a raging flame. Half of the battlefield's gazes were focused on him. At that moment, Li Sai was like a god from the heavens. Bang! Although they didn't understand what Li Sai was saying, Umar's death was a devastating blow to the Arab army on the Eastern Front. General is dead. General Umar has been killed by the Tang people. Everyone, run! All the Arabs scrambled to be the first, panicked as the retreating army crashed into the army in the rear. This was so abrupt that the Arab army, which had just about finished adjusting and preparing to attack, was instantly thrown into disarray by this attack. Kill! Those who openly offend our strong Han will be executed, no matter how far away. Those who openly offend our strong Han will be executed, no matter how far away. For the Tang dynasty. Roars resounded over the battlefield as the 100,000 Qixi reinforcements charged like tigers descending a mountain, their eyes red as they charged toward the Arab ranks. At this stage, there was no need for tactics. In the face of the Arab army's complete collapse, the Tang army surged forward like a massive wave. The Wuxian cavalry, the Ballista army, the King Gonka, the armies of Greater and Lesser Valor, the Annam Protectorate, the Qixi Protectorate, all of them transformed into a destructive flood that surged toward the 300,000 Arabs. Although the Arabs far outnumbered the Tang dynasty, and although some of the Arab soldiers in the rear were still trying to fight back, none of them could stop the army that had been completely routed. "Milord! Look over there. The Arabs have been beaten back. How could this be?" On the distant walls of Talas, countless gazes stared in shock at the tens of thousands of retreating figures below the walls. They had long ago noticed the arrival of reinforcements, but the frenzied assault of the Arabs had left them with no time to worry about them. Moreover, after 2 months of fierce fighting, no one understood better than the Anshi Protectorate army just how powerful the Arabian army was. This was an army far stronger than any they had encountered before. With just 100,000 reinforcements and a considerable number of mercenaries, defeating more than 300,000 fierce and valiant Arab soldiers was practically a fantasy tale. But no one had expected that this new army of reinforcements would not only emerge victorious, they would even crush the Arab army with overwhelming strength. The city walls were deathly still. The Arabs that had been charging up the cloud ladders had receded like the receding tide. As they watched the distant reinforcements fiercely battling with the Arabs, the howls and shouts of battle had given them an unprecedented shock, but also an unprecedented hope. "Pass on my order. Open the gates and work with the Qixi Protectorate to launch a pincer attack on the Arabs." At this moment, a voice that sounded a little tired but still dignified and loud rang in everyone's ears. Gao Xianji rested his hands on his sword as he stood on the city walls, his body as immovable as a mountain. His armor was in tatters and his entire body was stained with blood. Every part of his body was covered with deep scars from swords and sabers. The continuous fierce battles had consumed a great deal of his stellar energy and physical strength, but Gao Xianji's expression was calm. His tall and straight figure stood there as if he would never fall. "Yes, milord." An excited messenger at Gao Xianji's side quickly left to carry out the order. A few moments later, there was a massive boom as the warped gates of the city of Talas swung open, and the Anshi Protectorate army charged out of the city. The 300,000 Arab soldiers had already been utterly routed by the Qixi reinforcements, and now that the Anshi Protectorate army was charging out of the city, the army was thrown into even greater chaos, tens of thousands of Arabs scrambling to escape. "I didn't think that he really would come." Once there was no one left on the walls, Gao Xianji gave a long sigh, his expression much more relaxed. His stalwart body was also showing signs of deep exhaustion. Outside Talas, the Arab army was in complete disarray. "Bastard! Stop! Kill them! Don't run! Kill your way back! Anyone who attacks the formation will die!" The Arab commanders in the rear furiously roared as they attempted to stop the army's retreat. However, in the blink of an eye, even they themselves were swept up by the turbulence and dragged backwards. "Retreat! Retreat!" With the momentum lost, the Arabs finally gave the order to retreat from the more than 100,000 Tang soldiers pursuing them. The 300,000 soldiers left behind a trail of corpses as they retreated to the west like the receding tide. "Marquis! We've won!" In the rear, Su Qi turned to Wang Chong, a look of reverence on his face. "We've won, but it's not complete victory," Wang Chong indifferently said. Leaving behind the confused Su Qi, he mounted the white-hoofed shadow and slowly rode forward. The battlefield was filled with the clattering of metal, the shouts of fighting, the neighing of horses, the screams of screams, and the twanging of bowstrings. Only Wang Chong remained calm, taking a leisurely stroll over the Arab corpses and broken weapons as he slowly made his way through the army. His soldiers followed closely behind him. Wherever Wang Chong went, he became the center of the battle. He was like a blazing sun descending from the heavens, his radiance so dazzling that it was impossible to ignore his existence. The Arabs retreated like a crazed tide. The Arabs had suffered grievous losses in this battle, and even now, they had probably never imagined that they would lose, and they had even lost a top-class general like Umar, the Archangel of Arabia. But to Wang Chong, everything had been within his expectations. From the start of this battle until now, whether it was dodging the Arab hunting falcons, killing the scouts roaming the perimeter, seizing the initiative to defeat Umar's 70,000 soldiers, and then using the retreating army in the east to charge at the Arab army of 300,000, all of this had been the result of his meticulous planning. In Wuxiang City of Steel and the Qixi Protectorate headquarters, Wang Chong had used the model of Talas to simulate countless times, and now, all of this was playing out in the real world, without the slightest error. A man who calculates victory before the battle has to calculate much, a man who calculates defeat before the battle has to calculate little. This was one of the simplest principles of the art of war. For the sake of this current victory, Wang Chong had prepared for countless days and nights, taking into account every detail. To the Arabs, this defeat might have been a coincidence, but to Wang Chong, it was inevitable. Reporting. The Arabs have retreated to their designated position. Should we continue the pursuit? As Wang Chong was slowly advancing, a messenger galloped over, dismounted in front of Wang Chong, and respectfully kneeled on the ground. "There's no need." Seated on the white-hoofed shadow, Wang Chong gazed at the Arabs retreating from the western side of Talas and indifferently said, "There's no need. Inform Li Sai, Chen Bin, and the king of Ganka to stop the pursuit. In addition, order Zhang Shouji and the others to begin the operation." "Yes, Marquis." Upon hearing Wang Chong's order, the messenger mounted his horse and galloped off. Chapter 884. Moo. Behind the carriage were countless cows and sheep that formed mountains and seas. They also climbed over the hills and headed towards the battlefield. And then there were the carriages carrying provisions. At this point in the battle, the logistics personnel could finally enter the battlefield. With everything taken care of, Wang Chong turned his head and led his men toward the city of Talas. There, Wang Chong could already see a tall figure walking toward him. Lord Protector General. Not far from Gao Xianji, Wang Chong stopped. Although he had lived 2 lives and had once been revered as the war saint, this was the first time in Wang Chong's life that he had seen this illustrious wall of the empire, whose name could shake the western regions. Even in his last life, the war god of the western regions, Gao Xianji, had been an unreachable existence to Wang Chong, a descendant of ministers and generals. Later on, when the calamity broke out and Wang Chong rose like a comet to reverse the tides, this legendary great general of the western regions had long since fallen from the skies of the Tang dynasty. Thus, from start to finish, Wang Chong had never had the chance to meet one of the most illustrious great generals of the empire. Refined and handsome. This was Wang Chong's first impression of Gao Xianji. Although Gao Xianji's breathing was in disarray, his body covered in wounds, and his complexion haggard from the repeated battles, his every movement exuded a grand bearing that stood out even amongst great generals. It was rumored that Gao Xianji had admired the culture of the Tang dynasty since he was a child, and he had once spent 7 years studying in the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong didn't know if this rumor was true or not, but from the bearing Gao Xianji exuded, he could tell that it was most likely true. Protector General Wang, words cannot express my gratitude. On behalf of all the Anxi Protectorate Army, this Gao thanks my lord. From afar, Gao Xianji looked at Wang Chong with a complicated expression. Under the gazes of countless people, he faced Wang Chong and bowed respectfully. In this Battle of Talas, the Anxi Protectorate Army was at the end of its tether, and Gao Xianji was already prepared to die for his country if his entire army was wiped out. If not for Wang Chong's timely arrival with Qishi's reinforcements, the Anxi Protectorate Army might have become history. Wang Chong was 1 generation younger than Gao Xianji, so his ascension to the position of Qishi Protector General was a subject of much debate, at least amongst the Protector Generals and great generals of the empire. For someone of Gao Xianji's status to address Wang Chong as Protector General, was enough to express his respect and acknowledgement. Lord Protector General, there is no need to be so polite. This has always been Wang Chong's duty. Lord Protector General, what are the casualties in the city? A strange light flashed through Wang Chong's eyes, clearly sensing that Gao Xianji was referring to him in a special manner. We lost more than half of our men in this battle. In addition, there are more than 4,000 wounded in the city, and we lack enough Jinchuang medicine and rations. Gao Xianji said, a hint of sadness in his eyes. The Anxi Protectorate Army had never lost a battle in the western regions, but this time, it had suffered an unprecedented wound. It would probably take a very long time to recover. Understood. Wang Chong nodded, a hint of sympathy in his eyes. As for the Jinchuang medicine and rations, Lord Protector General need not worry. I have already brought enough supplies. Kong Xian, deliver the Jinchuang medicine and rations into the city. Yes. Marquis. Kong Xian waved a hand behind him, and soldiers began to escort the carriages loaded with rations and Jinchuang medicine into the city. The city of Talas had been at war for 2 months, and all kinds of supplies were bound to be lacking. Wang Chong had long ago expected this, so he had already prepared the necessary supplies. Bang! As the carriages of rations and medicine were being delivered into the city of Talas, the clattering of metal, accompanied by shouts, came from the front of the battlefield. Upon hearing this voice, Gao Xianji and the Anxi generals around him subconsciously turned their heads. Up ahead, they saw furnaces blazing and plumes of smoke billowing. Hundreds of craftsmen were standing on special transport carriages, nailing massive silver-white steel modules into the earth. The clattering they had just heard had been the sound of them hammering. All the craftsmen busied themselves, and they seemed to be extremely familiar with their work. They were connecting and hammering, their movements orderly and efficient. In just a few moments, tall walls of silver-white steel had appeared outside Talas. Not only that, the Chishi reinforcements that had been pursuing the Arabs like a tidal wave had clearly slowed down their pursuit after passing through the steel walls. Moreover, there was a clear gap between them and the Arab army. Lord Protector General, this is, a bearded and swarthy general standing next to Gao Xianji suddenly said. The other Anshi generals around him were also dumbfounded. The more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements led by Wang Chong currently had the upper hand. This was the perfect time to strike while the iron was hot and fiercely press forward, but for some reason, Wang Chong's Chishi reinforcements had clearly slowed down, and there was even a clear gap between them and the routed Arab army. Given Wang Chong's reputation and the performance of his army, such a low-level and major mistake should never have occurred. And then there were those busy craftsmen and the silver-white steel walls. Everyone who saw this was confused. No one knew what Wang Chong and the Chishi reinforcements were doing. At the front of the army, Gao Xianji said nothing. He seemed to have his own speculations, but he also didn't seem to understand them. Wang Chong's fighting style was completely unlike that of an orthodox army. Moreover, for a battle of more than 100,000 soldiers, he had actually brought craftsmen and furnaces that had no fighting power. This was simply unimaginable. In the history of war, such a thing had never happened before. Only Wang Chong could do such a thing. This is General Qing Qinli, correct? Wang Chong suddenly asked as he stared at this fierce and tyrannical general with a storm of energy. Lord Protector General recognizes me. Qing Qinli was dumbfounded. I've heard of you. Wang Chong faintly smiled, but his mind was slightly thumping. In the Anshi Protectorate army, besides Gao Xianji, there had originally been two other valiant generals. One was the invincible great general Li Sai that he had recruited, and the other was this Qing Qinli. Although Qing Qinli had not reached Li Sai's level in the end, he had joined the army earlier and had more experience, so his cultivation was actually higher than Li Sai's. Qing Qinli was tall and mighty, his face intimidating. On the battlefield, he was the number 2 figure of the Anshi Protectorate army, a peak brigadier general. He was probably even more formidable than Uzun's Dian Mangpoch. Thus, even though this was Wang Chong's first time meeting him, he had still recognized him at a glance. The fact that the Anshi Protectorate army had been able to hold out for so long was probably due to this. It's best to pursue the remnants of the enemy. Killing as many Arabs as possible is naturally a good thing. However, the Arabs have only been attacked by their own people and have fallen into chaos. They haven't lost their main force. Even if they had lost a large number of soldiers, they still had around 270 to 80,000 soldiers, more than twice as many as ours. Moreover, all of them were brave and skilled elites. In addition, the top-class Arab commanders, including Abu Muslim, had still not appeared. If my intelligence is correct, this Abbasid Caliphate governor of the East is a strategist. He can't be destroyed by a single defeat. Wang Chong's eyes were wise and farsighted. As the war saint of the highest status in the history of the Tang dynasty, Wang Chong was confident in facing any opponent, but he would never underestimate any opponent because of this. Moreover, Abu Muslim was an extremely difficult and formidable opponent. In Arabia, which revered battle and slaughter and emphasized strength, the fact that he had been able to walk through mountains of corpses and seas of blood to sit on the position of governor of the East was a testament to his strength. And even the most ordinary person, if they could experience 100 or even several thousand fierce battles, would eventually become a top-class great general. Defeating one of Abu Muslim's elite generals was not the same as defeating Abu Muslim. This Abbasid Caliphate governor of the East was known as the governor of iron and blood. Not only was he astonishingly powerful, he was also extremely astute. He would not be easy to deal with. Although Wang Chong had never met him before, when Wang Chong had first entered the Chishi Protectorate, the two had already exchanged blows. This governor of iron and blood coveted the Tang dynasty far more than Wang Chong had imagined. Before the war with the Tang dynasty had even begun, his tentacles had already extended as far as Qixi. Buzz! Wang Chong's words instantly silenced all the Anshi generals, their faces solemn. The name Abu Muslim was like a curse. After fighting at Talas for 2 months, no one understood this person better than the Anshi generals. As the most elite force of the empire, the Anshi Protectorate army had been proud, confident, and valiant before entering Talas. The Anshi Protectorate army had always believed itself to be invincible and invincible, until it encountered these courageous and fearless Arabs. If not for the high and thick walls of the city of Talas, the Anshi Protectorate army would not have been able to last so long in the face of the more than 300,000 Arab soldiers far stronger than Mengshi Zhao and Uzun. But, Lord Protector General, although Abu Muslim is very formidable, not even he could have predicted Lord Protector General's arrival and the rapid collapse of the eastern battlefield. If he wasn't even prepared for this battle, we might really be able to use this opportunity to completely defeat the Arabs. A tranquil West general clenched his fists and could not help but say in excitement. Chapter 885. Wang Chong smiled and said nothing, only glanced at the other members of Anshi. Su Yang, don't speak nonsense. The situation on the battlefield is treacherous and involves the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers. Do you think you can do whatever you want? Protector General Wang is correct. We truly can't let our guard down against a powerful foe like the Arabs. Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli said after a few moments of serious thought. Although he very much wanted to finish off the Arabs in one fell swoop, even he had to admit that Wang Chong was correct. The Arabs had only suffered a minor defeat. If the Arabs really only had this much skill, they would never have been able to force the Protector General and the Anshi Protectorate army into this state. The Protector General had even prepared to lead the Anshi Protectorate army in a final battle with the Arabs, sacrificing himself for the country. Pride was sure to lead the defeated army. This battle did not only concern the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers, but also the fate of the western regions, the safety of Qixi, Longxi, and even the capital. Such an important matter could not be decided by emotion. Wang Chong glanced at Cheng Qianli, a hint of praise in his eyes. Wang Chong had never interacted with Cheng Qianli before and did not understand him very well, but from these words, he could tell that this brigadier general of the Tang dynasty was not only a martial artist, but also a master of strategy. At the very least, he was not the sort to be easily swayed by emotion. In truth, besides what I just said, there's another reason. Their banners. Wang Chong smiled and turned his head, his face brimming with confidence. Everyone's hearts trembled as they turned to look in the direction the Arabs had fled. The black Arab war banners were scattered all over the army. But all of them were confused by these war banners, not understanding what Wang Chong was up to. No matter what Abu Muslim is up to, this doesn't seem like the sign of an army being routed. If he really wants to do something, he should work harder and put in more effort. Wang Chong had a look of knowing everything like the back of his hand, and his eyes looked extremely wise. Boom! Wang Chong's words caused all the Anshi generals, including the people at Wang Chong's side, to tremble in shock. They only knew that Wang Chong had arranged for the troops to retreat once the pursuit had reached a certain point, but they didn't know that there was such an inside story. And he had no idea that the Black Arab War banner was hiding such a secret. Indeed. The mention of Wang Chong's warning made everyone turn their attention to the Black Arab War banners. Even though the Arabs were retreating in defeat, they still seemed to possess some sort of order. No matter what, this did not look like a panicked, chaotic, and utterly defeated army retreating. Hiss. Upon realizing this, everyone's eyelids twitched violently, and they sucked in a breath of cold air. None of them could say a word. Qianli, Protector General Wang is correct. Abu Muslim is not that easy to defeat. He has already laid a trap for us. Pass on my order. Have the soldiers retreat. At this moment, Gao Xianji's dignified voice resounded in everyone's ears. A trap. The officers around him were dumbfounded. Lord Protector General is wise. Wang Chong faintly smiled and nodded. Gao Xianji truly lived up to his reputation as the war god of the western regions. He was a veteran of many battles and extremely sensitive to the various changes on the battlefield. It was clear that he had also seen through Abu Muslim's intentions. Su Qi, pass on my order. Have the army retreat and cease the pursuit. Su Qi gave his assent and hurriedly left. In the distance, the more than 100,000 Qixi soldiers and the Anxi Protectorate army slowly retreated like the receding tide, ceasing the pursuit. The two groups of people were completely separated. At the same time, several li to the west of Talas, in a place that could not be seen, few people noticed that the first group of Arab soldiers that had retreated had begun to set up an arced ambush along the rugged ground. Nearly 100,000 Arab cavalry were lying in wait around this ambush. These cavalry had been the first to withdraw from the battlefield, and the terrain made it impossible to notice them from afar. Why aren't they here yet? What's the rush? Lord Governor has already planned everything out. Once they enter our encirclement, their deaths will be upon them. It's still Lord Governor who's formidable. Even in death, these Tang people would never have imagined that just when they were on the verge of victory, they would be completely annihilated by us. It's just a pity for Umar, but for the Empire, it was worth sacrificing him. All of you, shut up. The Tang people are about to arrive. Hurry and get ready. At the very back of the ambush circle were several Arab generals with chilling eyes and thick body hair, dressed in black heavy armor. They were looking forward, their eyes brimming with killing intent. The Arabian Empire had been established for several hundred years, and through its constant conquest and expansion, it had developed its own unique military tactics. If the Tang people continued to hole up in the city, the Arabs truly wouldn't have much of a way to deal with them. Although the Arabian Empire's cavalry was unparalleled in the world, it was not skilled in sieging cities. All it could do was drag it out and attack city after city. Compared to other factions, it did not have much of an advantage. But once the Tang people entered the wilderness, everything changed. Whether they had the upper hand or the lower hand, the Arabs had their own unique tactics. What's going on? Why are the Tang people retreating? Suddenly, the Arab generals grimaced and straightened their backs. Absurd. How could this be? Why did they suddenly stop pursuing? Did they see through it? Impossible. They're in the middle of a great victory. How could they give up? The Arab generals had grim expressions on their faces. They could clearly see that the more than 100,000 Tang people had suddenly retreated without warning, and all of them were dumbfounded. In the past, they had used this same tactic to defeat many powerful foes. When they were at their happiest and proudest, they would defeat and kill them. But to suddenly retreat when they were clearly on the verge of a victory was something they had never encountered before. Just what's going on with the leader of the Tang people? The group of people were completely speechless. Buzz. At the same time, in another direction, a figure as tall as a mountain suddenly stood up slowly. His gaze was sharp, and a terrifying aura that could collapse mountains erupted from his body. In that instant, the earth rumbled and the heavens shook. The entire earth seemed to be unable to bear his weight and began to buzz and tremble. How could this be? Abu Muslim's dark brown eyes stared into the distance, an astonishing cold light exploding from them. In the fierce winds, Abu Muslim's aura began to undulate, and his enormous pressure pressed down like a mountain range. All the surrounding guards lowered their heads as if they were facing a god, their bodies shivering in fear and unease. In this war with the Tang dynasty, whether it was the fall of the Shur kingdom, the fall of Talas, or the long and drawn-out battles, Abu Muslim had always remained calm and composed. But at this moment, his steely face finally began to ripple with unprecedented seriousness. Just what kind of person is the leader of this Tang army? It had been a very long time since Abu Muslim had encountered an opponent like this. Ever since he had joined the army, starting out as a nameless soldier of the Arabian Empire and eventually becoming the governor of the East, expanding the empire's territory to Talas and the western regions, he had defeated one foe after another. It had been a very long time since Abu Muslim had encountered an opponent that gave him such a strange feeling. Although he still hadn't seen the commander of the Tang dynasty reinforcements, this invisible clash had already left Abu Muslim with an ill foreboding. His opponent this time was far more formidable than he had imagined, far more difficult to deal with than any of his previous opponents. But this was only the beginning. Lord Governor, look over there. A thin Arab general with a high nose, brimming with strength and wildness, suddenly pointed into the distance. Following his finger, they could clearly see many ordinary craftsmen at the front of the Tang people's army, thousands of blazing furnaces, and silver walls of steel that resembled fish scales rising around Talas. In a flash, all the Arab generals felt an indescribably strange sensation. The battlefield was the most dangerous place, where life and death could be decided by a single thought. No one had ever dared to bring these non-combatant craftsmen onto the battlefield, as doing so would only be sending them to their deaths. And those silver walls of steel. No one knew what these Tang people were doing. They had participated in so many battles, defeated so many opponents, destroyed and conquered so many countries, but the Arabs had never encountered such a strange battle. Pass on my order to Amur. Have him lead the Bakr cataphracts to attack the Tang people. Abu Muslim suddenly ordered as he stared into the distance. Yes, Lord Governor. An Arab messenger quickly turned his horse around and hurried away. Marquis, they really did stop. In the distance, Su Kai, mounted on a Turkic warhorse outside the walls of Talas, couldn't help but say as he looked into the distance. At the height of the battle, everyone's eyes were focused on the panicked Arab soldiers closest to the battlefield, but they weren't paying much attention to the overall situation. But now that the order to retreat had been given and the soldiers had calmed down, they could clearly see that the Arabs were retreating more and more slowly, and in the rear, the Arab soldiers were even showing signs of stopping. They were not continuing to flee. Chapter 886. Wang Chong only faintly smiled. This was all within his expectations. The Arabs were extremely crafty. Although they had powerful cavalry and a formidable army, they liked to feign surrender. Only the Arab army would set up an ambush to lure the enemy in while retreating. In his last life, after the Arabs defeated the Tang dynasty, they sent their strongest Mamelukes into the Yuzhan plateau to invade the Yuzhan Empire. In the end, they were met with the desperate resistance of Dayan Mangpoj and the White Braves. After suffering a severe setback, the Arabs had used this tactic to turn defeat into victory, dealing a heavy blow to the main force of the Yuzhan Empire. Wang Chong remembered this part of history like the back of his hand, and he knew these crafty Arab tactics like the back of his hand. More importantly, as the war saint of his generation, Wang Chong was extremely sensitive to the various changes on the battlefield. Even the tiniest of clues was enough for him to notice, and the Arab war banners were still standing straight and did not appear to be in the slightest of defeat. Pass on my order. Speed up the construction. Wang Chong said. Yes. Su Kai received the order, and a group of horses quickly departed. These Arabs were far more crafty than he had imagined. This war concerned the safety of the more than 100,000 soldiers and all of the western regions and Chishi. This war was of the utmost importance, and everyone was doing their utmost to assist Wang Chong, carrying out Wang Chong's every order. As far as Su Kai could see, Chen Bin, Cheng Sanyuan, Zhang Ke, Su Shixian, Kong Xian, and the people of Deflecting Blade Manor were all busy preparing the battlefield. Hiya! Su Kai urged his horse forward, quickly vanishing into the ranks of the Arab army. Rumble! Not long after Su Kai left, the earth quaked and dust churned as a powerful force of Arab cavalry, their warhorses branded with the image of two black crescent moons, rode out from the retreating Arab army. The aura of this cavalry was extremely powerful. Each of the riders on the horses had bulging muscles, and as they galloped, each of them was wrapped in a thick black mist. In front of this force of cavalry, the other fleeing Arab cavalry paled in comparison, like fireflies before the bright moon. 7,000 to 8,000 cavalrymen galloped as fast as lightning towards where Wang Chong and the others were. Lord Protector General, enemy attack. At almost the same time, an officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army galloped through the army toward Wang Chong. "Sir, how should we deal with this?" Wang Chong only smiled and glanced into the distance, his expression unperturbed. A trifling force of 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers would have little effect on the army. No matter what sort of legends the Arabs had in the past, the moment he arrived on the battlefield, these legends were doomed to come to an end. "Tell Chen Bin that he can deal with this himself," Wang Chong said. "Yes." The officer had not expected Wang Chong to give such an order, and his body trembled. Raising his head, he saw that Wang Chong was calm and composed, a faint smile on his lips as he looked at the distant battlefield, a confident look on his face that victory was in his grasp. The officer froze for a moment, but Wang Chong's mood had infected him. Calming down, his nervousness vanished, and he left to carry out the order. "Ready." At the very front of the battlefield, Chen Bin stood motionless, his eyes focused on the battlefield. Across from him, a cloud of dust was rising more than 100 zhang into the air, and the ground was also trembling. Through the dust, Chen Bin could see Arab cavalry charging toward him like gods of death. Unlike any of the Arabs he had encountered before, Chen Bin felt an enormous pressure from this force of cavalry, a pressure that followed him like a storm, suffocating him. But whether it was Chen Bin or the 3,000 ballista soldiers behind him, all of them were frozen in place like rocks. The might of a cavalry charge was publicly acknowledged to be unparalleled in the world. If such a force of cavalry charged over, the 3,000 ballista soldiers behind Chen Bin were certain to suffer grievous casualties. But everything had its vanquisher. Whether or not cavalry had once been the #1 soldier in the world, everything had changed the moment Chen Bin's ballista team had appeared. Clang! A cold light flashed. Chen Bin's expression was solemn as he raised the sword in his hand and pointed it forward. Creak creak. With Chen Bin's movements, the Han soldiers of the Qixi Protectorate Army stood at the very front of the ballistae and began to adjust the bolts. The sharp tips of the bolts were quickly aimed at the Bakr cataphracts. Qixi's ballista teams were divided into groups of 5. One person was responsible for adjusting the bolts while the others were responsible for loading and assisting. Strangle formation. Charge. At the same time, a bloodthirsty and resounding order resounded through the army. In the center of the army, an Arab general with green eyes and a brown beard harshly shouted. Rumble. Stellar energy vibrated as a powerful wave of energy soared more than 100 zhang into the air. Amr was not the strongest general in the Arab army, but he was definitely the bravest and most fearless. The Bakr cataphracts were soldiers that Abu Muslim had recruited from the strategic stronghold of the Abbasid Caliphate. They were one of the elite cavalry units under Abu Muslim's command. Their greatest characteristic was their extremely thick armor, which could block the attacks of the vast majority of ballistae, bows, and arrows. Even the sharpest sabers would only be able to leave shallow marks on their bodies. In a large-scale melee, the Bakr cataphracts could often rely on their thick armor to charge into the densest and strongest areas of the enemy, scattering the enemy and disrupting their formation. They were one of the best offensive units of the Arab cavalry. In a single charge, the Bakr cataphracts would not only scatter the enemy's main force, they would also suffer minimal losses. This was an important reason why Abu Muslim had dispatched them. 80 zhang. 50 zhang. 40 zhang. As he got closer and closer, Chen Bin continued to calculate and concentrate. These Arab cavalry were extremely fast and terrifyingly powerful. The slightest mistake could result in the annihilation of the 3,000 ballista teams. Release. Just when the atmosphere was at its most tense, Chen Bin swung his sword down heavily. Boom! There was a thunderous boom in the air, and the moment Chen Bin swung down his sword, a thick ballista bolt, 1 zhang long, shot forward like a bolt of lightning. Ni. With a heaven-shaking neigh, blood sprayed into the air as the Arab warhorse at the very front was stabbed with a bowl-sized hole. The long ballista bolt pierced through the thick armor of the warhorse, pierced through the horse's forehead, emerged from the horse's rear, and then pierced through the second and third Arab horsemen. Only after reaching the fourth Arab horseman did the ballista bolt stop, leaving a long trail of blood in its wake that was both beautiful and terrifying. What thick armor! Chen Bin's eyes widened at this sight. Ballistae and ballista bolts were the symbol of the Tang dynasty's finest craftsmanship and the strength of the country. Each ballista bolt had been tempered hundreds of times, requiring at least several months to be forged. Moreover, they had to go through several dozen procedures and be inscribed with many different inscriptions. In terms of value, these bolts were equivalent to a lump of gold. It was precisely for this reason that the ballistae and ballista bolts of the Tang dynasty were so terrifyingly powerful that they were regarded as important weapons of the country. When dealing with other Arabs, Chen Bin's ballista bolts had been able to pierce through 7 or 8 Arab horsemen, sometimes even 10 some. But against this unknown elite Arab horseman, each ballista bolt was only able to pierce through 4 horsemen before reaching their limit. He had never encountered such a situation before. But Chen Bin's eyes only blinked for a moment before returning to normal. No matter how thick and sturdy the armor of these Arab cavalry was, they were doomed to be like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of the 3,000 ballistae. The second formation. Fire. Chen Bin raised his sword and gave another order. Boom boom boom. Tens of thousands of ballista bolts exploded into the air, engulfing the Bakr cataphracts. In May, wave after wave of Bakr cataphracts fell to Chen Bin's ballista army. Fire. Wave after wave of ballista bolts rained down. Chen Bin had divided the 3,000 ballista teams into 3 groups, with each group consisting of 1,000 ballista teams forming a formation. When one formation finished firing, another would take its place. Round after round, the ballista bolts fired in rapid succession, leaving no gaps at all. The 7 or 8,000 Bakr cataphracts suffered grievous casualties, none of them able to get within 10 zhang of the Tang dynasty. With Chen Bin as the boundary, the area several hundred zhang in front of him had been transformed into a bloody battlefield. The neighing of horses, screams, collisions, and the rumbling of ballista bolts mixed into one. The corpses of the Bakr cataphracts were strewn everywhere. 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, the famed Bakr cataphracts of the Arabs were suffering heavy casualties at an astonishing rate in front of the 3,000 ballista teams. Retreat! Retreat! The Arab general Amr paled at this sight. The attacks of the Tang people had been too swift and fierce. Moreover, their unique cycle of firing and seamless attacks had made it impossible for the 8,000 Bakr cataphracts to reach the Tang people's ranks. The casualties were far too terrifying. Amr had never seen such a fierce and frightening assault force in his entire life. Rumble. The Bakr cataphracts had left as quickly as they had come. But while they had come from 7 or 8,000, they had left with less than 1,000. The famed Bakr army had been on the verge of extinction in this battle. Stop! Chen Bin raised his sword, and the 3,000 ballista teams behind him immediately stopped firing. All of them silently took up orderly positions as if they had never moved. This sort of strict discipline left a deep impression on anyone who saw it. The strength of the ballista army lay in its ability to attack and defend with the army, but it was actually less effective in pursuit. Chapter 887. The 100,000 Chishi reinforcements quickly calmed down. The only thing left was the thick stench of blood in the air and the corpses of the Bakr cataphracts strewn in front of the defensive line, a testament to the ferocity and power of the Tang dynasty. There's no need to worry about the other side. Hurry up and finish the fortifications. Begin treating the wounded and counting the casualties. Repair the ballistae. Inspect all the equipment again. As orders were passed down, the Tang dynasty army busied itself, but it was also orderly. Everything was proceeding according to Wang Chong's plan. Meanwhile, with the heavily wounded Bakr cataphracts under Amur's command, the Arabs retreated like the tide, no longer probing the enemy. Lord Governor, Amur failed. The Tang people did not pursue. Ziyad said from next to Abu Muslim. Ziyad was about 36 years old. He had a short mustache and brown eyes that were as sharp as swords. As the Arab deputy governor of the East, as well as Abu Muslim's aide and subordinate, Ziyad had an important role to play in this operation. Although he was not as strong as Abu Muslim, Ziyad was still a peak brigadier general, a top-class expert on the verge of stepping into the great general level. Not only that, Ziyad was also a rare tactician. Abu Muslim had always relied heavily on his intelligence and strategy. In the previous battle, Ziyad had been leading the army in arranging for the soldiers to retreat, doing his best to minimize the losses. Thus, he had only appeared at Abu Muslim's side now. Ziyad, what do you think of this new commander of the Tang dynasty? After some time, Abu Muslim looked forward and spoke. His eyes were deep and his expression calm, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. I don't know. We know nothing about him. Ziyad's brow was tightly creased, a pensive look in his eyes. This person isn't from Anxi. For this battle, Gao Xianji has brought all the top-class generals of Anxi. It was impossible for anyone to be more powerful than him. He must have been sent by the emperor of the Tang dynasty. I remember that we had sent spies and scouts into the interior of the Tang dynasty to investigate, but I don't know what happened. Those spies and scouts lost contact with each other, and they never sent back any news. I'm afraid that they were discovered and eliminated by the Tang people. Now that I think about it, it's really a pity. As for this new commander of the Tang people, although we don't have his information and can't see where he is, judging from his performance, this person has probably seen through our ambush. Moreover, the army he leads is also very powerful. Previously, the Tang people's army led by Gao Xianji also used that kind of huge crossbow, but its power was not as terrifying. His accuracy and shooting speed are not comparable to Gao Xianji's. I have a feeling that this new commander-in-chief is even more powerful than Gao Xianji, and he's even more difficult to deal with. You think he's even stronger than that Anxi war god? Abu Muslim slightly frowned, rather surprised by Ziyad's assessment. In the last 2 months of fierce battle, Gao Xianji and his Anxi protectorate army had dealt a heavy blow to the Arabs. Before this, Abu Muslim and the entire Arabian Empire had the lofty ambition to sweep through the western regions with an army of 300,000 and even occupy the Tang dynasty, accomplishing a feat that had never been accomplished by any caliph. But a trifling Gao Xianji and the city of Talas had dealt a severe blow to Abu Muslim and his powerful Arab army. Although they were enemies, Abu Muslim would never belittle his opponents. Gao Xianji truly did have the qualifications to be his opponent. Even though Abu Muslim's desire to kill this man had never wavered. But now, Ziyad actually believed that this new Arab commander was even more formidable than Gao Xianji. In terms of strength, I haven't seen him yet, so I can't make a judgment for now. But in terms of tactics and strategy, my intuition is that Gao Xianji really can't compare to him. Ziyad solemnly said. Gao Xianji was a tenacious opponent. The fact that he had managed to delay the Arab army for 2 months was proof enough. But Gao Xianji had not relied on his own tactics and strategy, but on the high and thick walls of the city of Talas. Although the battle had lasted for a long time, the true losses had been far less severe. On the other hand, the commander of the Tang dynasty, who had yet to show his face, had killed Umar in a single clash, dealt a heavy blow to Amr's Bakr cataphracts, and had even killed nearly 100,000 Arab soldiers in this first clash. And this time, the Tang dynasty's reinforcements had only been a little more than 100,000. This alone was enough for Ziyad to place an unprecedented amount of importance on this new commander of the Tang dynasty. Moreover, this new commander hadn't even borrowed the strength of any city. Abu Muslim instantly fell silent, a grave look in his eyes. After fighting side by side with Ziyad for so many years, Abu Muslim had always placed great trust in Ziyad's judgment and intuition. In their 10-some years together, Abu Muslim had never seen Ziyad give such a high evaluation of an enemy commander before he even met him. Rumble. As he was thinking, a boom came from up ahead, completely different from any of the previous booms, and it quickly attracted the attention of Abu Muslim and Ziyad. The two of them raised their heads. In the distance, they could see countless craftsmen and soldiers working together in the rear of the Tang army. They were methodically installing strange, huge, silver rectangular boxes covered with holes on the surface onto the tall steel walls. The two highest Arab commanders grimaced at this sight, their eyes brimming with anger. Although they didn't know what sort of secrets these silver chests held, their experience allowed them to immediately tell that they were some sort of powerful defensive equipment. The combination of these silver chests and the steel walls made it obvious what the Tang people were doing. In front of more than 200,000 Arab soldiers, they were brazenly constructing fortifications on a large scale. This was a blatant provocation. To the west of the Tsong Mountains, Arabia was synonymous with terror and destruction, and all empires and factions would pale at the mere mention of its name. In all of history, no opponent had ever dared to humiliate an Arab army of more than 200,000. Bastard! Ziyad clenched his fists, his eyes exploding with killing intent. Although Abu Muslim said nothing, his face had also turned gloomy. Lord Governor, have our entire army press forward and completely crush the Tang people's army. They're too impudent. A voice came from the side, and all the Arab commanders around Abu Muslim turned to look, their eyes blazing with fury. The Arabs were renowned for their bravery and skill in battle. Umar's death could not represent the entire Arab army, and the true main force of the Arab army had yet to move. Once they did, the battle would be completely different. Enough! Abu Muslim suddenly bellowed, his expression as cold as ice. In a flash, all the Arab commanders fell silent, lowering their heads with respect in their eyes. I have my own plans. Pass on my order. All soldiers are to retreat and reorganize. Yes, Lord Governor. A messenger next to him said, his voice trembling. Abu Muslim's eyes were spitting fire, but he said no more. His eyes were constantly shifting as he stared at the Tang dynasty army. No one could tell what he was thinking. The Tang people had to be eliminated and the western regions had to be brought under the Arabian Empire. He would be the first governor of the East to defeat the Tang dynasty. But before that, every decision had to be made with caution. He could not be rash. Flap flap. Just when Abu Muslim was preparing to reorganize his army and launch an attack against the Tang people, he suddenly heard the flapping of wings. Whoosh! A black messenger pigeon flew down like a bolt of lightning and landed on Abu Muslim's arm. Caw caw. The black messenger pigeon began to cry out as it slowly walked on Abu Muslim's arm. On its right leg was a rolled-up piece of white paper. Buzz! The other Arab commanders didn't react to this black messenger pigeon, but Abu Muslim and Ziyad glanced at each other and saw the shock and astonishment in each other's eyes. Abu Muslim took the letter from the black messenger pigeon's leg and slowly unfurled it. After glancing at it, his expression instantly turned strange. Lord Governor, what does the letter say? Ziyad took a step forward and asked. Abu Muslim said nothing, only handed over the letter. This, after reading the contents of the letter, Ziyad's expression turned strange, and his brown eyes slowly began to shine. All soldiers, hear my order. The army is to organize and delay the operation. Tomorrow, we will fight the Tang people. Yes, milord. Meanwhile, outside the city of Talas, Marquis, they're retreating. The Arabs are really retreating this time. Next to Wang Chong, Zhang Ke placed a hand over his forehead as he watched the Arab army retreat like a receding tide, a look of excitement on his face. Zhang Ke was not a fighter, so after the aerial battle, he had remained at Wang Chong's side. Su Ke, Chen Burang, Sun Jiming, Zhuang Buping, Qi Weisi, Zhao Jingyan, and even Wang Chong's father Wang Yan and big brother Wang Fu had all been sent to the front lines to command the army. The only people left at Wang Chong's side were Zhang Ke and a few others. It's not that simple. This battle has only just begun. Chapter 888. The Arabs had already withdrawn a great distance, but they had not retreated to the strategic fortress of Khorasan. Instead, they stared at the Tang army from a distance, their intentions obvious. It was the Arab style to fight to the last man or to lose 3/4 of their soldiers. They would never easily retreat. This was also why Arabia was so troublesome and terrifying. It was also why the kingdoms of the western regions viewed Arabia as a destroyer. But this time, they had run into the Tang dynasty and Wang Chong. For this decisive battle with the Arabs, Wang Chong had prepared for a long time. He had prepared a large number of weapons and provisions, and he had even led an army of more than 100,000, equipped with ballistae, Wuxia steel weapons, meteoric metal armor, and other such weapons. His will and ability to fight were no weaker than theirs. Two empires, only one will survive. Abu Muslim, the empire that survives can't be Arabia. Wang Chong's eyes flickered. Wang Chong's expression was relaxed, but he was thinking back to the Stone of Destiny's words. Nothing was accidental. In this world, it was rare for two great empires to coexist at the same time, and even if they did, they would only exist for a very short period of time. In his last life, the Tang dynasty had fought with Arabia at Talas and suffered a crushing defeat, losing the western regions. From then on, the Tang dynasty's efforts to expand and invade the outside world were transformed into an obsession with internal strife, and the civilization of the Central Plains continued to wane. Wang Chong had always believed that this was a coincidence, but the Stone of Destiny had revealed that this was far from the case. Behind him was the western regions, the Tang dynasty. Whether for the sake of the Tang dynasty or for the prosperity of the Central Plains for the next several thousand years, Wang Chong could not retreat. As these thoughts flew through his mind, Wang Chong quickly regained his composure. Zhang Ke, send out your birds to keep an eye on the movements of the Arabs at all times. In addition, I will arrange for an archer square to work with you. Once the Arab hunting falcons arrive, the archer square will work with you to kill them all. Wang Chong said. The Arabian hunting falcons were extremely fast and ferocious. Although Zhang Ke had wiped out a wave, it had only been one of the Arabian hunting falcons. Zhang Ke's eagle team alone was far from enough to deal with the entire Arab hunting army. Using the ground and air forces to launch a pincer attack was a tactic that Wang Chong had specially designed for the Arabs. Yes. Marquis. Zhang Ke accepted the order and left. In the army of the Tang dynasty, there had never been anyone like Wang Chong who valued aerial surveillance as much as he did. Zhang Ke did not disappoint. The eagle team he led played an increasingly important role in Wang Chong's battles. This included the war with the Arabs. If Zhang Ke had not destroyed the Arab hunting falcons ahead of time, the outcome of the war might have been completely different. Once Zhang Ke left, Wang Chong calmed down and turned his eyes to the vast sea of Arab soldiers. In this battle, one of Wang Chong's greatest foes had yet to appear. During the assault of the Arab Bakr cataphracts, Wang Chong had vaguely sensed their will. This was a clash in the air, as well as an invisible contest. Abu Muslim. Wang Chong could clearly sense that the enemy was using that group of cavalry to probe him, and Wang Chong had also clearly displayed his will through the ballista army. The first clash between these two commanders had ended with Wang Chong's victory, but Wang Chong was well aware that this was far from over. "Protector General Wang, is this the steel wall?" Just at this moment, a dignified voice rang out. Gao Xianji suddenly spoke as he stood at the side with his back ramrod straight, his gaze looking ahead. Wang Chong froze, and then he smiled and nodded. "Yes." At these words, Gao Xianji's eyes exploded with a sharp light, a strange light flitting through his pupils. In the War of the Southwest, Wang Chong had used his steel wall tactics to defeat the combined army of Daluan Ruozhen and Jelifeng. This matter had long ago caused a huge uproar throughout the world, and in the Battle of the Triangular Gap, Wang Chong had established a steel fortress on the Yuzhen Plateau and used it to defeat Dusong Mangpoj and Dian Mangpoj. Wang Chong's unique tactics had become so famous that even Gao Xianji had heard of them in the distant western regions. But this was the first time Gao Xianji had actually seen them. "Not bad." A hint of surprise flashed through Gao Xianji's eyes as he heartily praised. "The most formidable aspect of the Arabs is their cavalry. By using this tactic to divide them, we can truly destroy the Arab formation. Without the advantage of a formation, the cavalry will not be as formidable." Lord Protector General's thoughts are bold and imaginative, able to think of places that ordinary people cannot. It is no wonder that you were favored by His Divine Majesty at such a young age and became the youngest Protector General of the Empire. However, the city of Talas is surrounded by wilderness that is extremely advantageous to cavalry. Wouldn't it be better to enter the city and use the thick walls of the city of Talas to defend it? These last words revealed Gao Xianji's true intentions. When Wang Chong led his army to the city and routed the Arabs, Gao Xianji had originally believed that Wang Chong would lead his army into the city and use the city of Talas to defend it with him. But now, it seemed that Wang Chong was arranging his army and constructing fortifications outside the city, with no intention of entering the city at all. This was completely different from Gao Xianji's plan. In Gao Xianji's view, Wang Chong's plan was far too risky. There were no natural strongholds to rely on, and the terrain was unfavorable. But since Wang Chong had come to save him and was of equal status to him, Gao Xianji could not directly point this out, so he had used the City of Steel to tactfully express his intentions. Given Gao Xianji's status, he was already showing Wang Chong considerable respect. Lord Protector General, I know what you mean." Wang Chong faintly smiled, his eyes looking forward, his demeanor relaxed and exuding a natural charm. "I naturally know that the walls of the city of Talas are high and thick, and the terrain is advantageous, but there are some things that we must do, some risks that we must take. The Arabs have come with a torrential momentum, and their desire is not limited to the Shi kingdom. The western regions and the Tang dynasty are their true goal. There is a saying that goes, when two enemies meet on a narrow path, the courageous will prevail. In this world, the only one that can contend with the Tang dynasty is the Arabian Empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Lord Protector General should be well aware of this. If we cannot thoroughly defeat them and make them understand the terrifying power of the Tang dynasty, then, there will be no end of trouble. This world is one of survival of the fittest, where the strong prey on the weak. Our Tang dynasty was able to rule the western regions through our own strength. The Arabs were able to expand to the west of the Tsong Mountains and encroach on the Tang dynasty through their own strength. Whether Milord has realized it or not, from the moment we arrived here, everything was decided. In this battle, if we dare to enter the city and show the slightest fear, the Arabs will swarm in, and we will lose the initiative, handing over the advantage we worked so hard to build. Lord Protector General should understand that the Tang dynasty no longer has any soldiers to deploy." At this point, Wang Chong paused, his gaze slowly sweeping over the crowd. All was quiet. All the Anxi generals, including the generals at Wang Chong's side, had been captivated by Wang Chong's words, all of them solemnly looking at him. All the soldiers of the Tang dynasty, from the east of the Tsong Mountains to Qixi and Wuxiang, had been mobilized. Just as Wang Chong had said, Talas was probably the last line of defense. If we win this battle, we can protect the western regions for several decades, or at least slow down the advance of the Arabs. Lord Protector General should know that the army led by Abu Muslim is only the soldiers of that empire in the east. This empire has at least 3 times the number of soldiers in the rear. We don't have many choices. If we lose, Anxi and Qixi will change sides, and even Longxi will crumble to the threat of the Arabs. All of these are things that we must consider. Wang Chong sternly said, one last glance at the commander-in-chief of the Anxi Protectorate Army, Gao Xianji. Gao Xianji said nothing, but his brows were deeply furrowed. As a general, his duty was to lead his soldiers into battle, to win battles, and to win battles after battles. This was why Gao Xianji had said those words and entered the city of Talas. But Wang Chang's standpoint was completely different from his own. Wang Chang's strategic vision and considerations were far more profound. After careful consideration, even Gao Xianji had to admit that there were many aspects of this war that he had not considered thoroughly. I understand. Gao Xianji gave a serious nod. He gave Wang Chong a deep glance, acting like he was meeting this 17-year-old youth of the Tang dynasty for the first time. Seeing once is better than hearing 100 times. There had been many misunderstandings between Gao Xianji and Wang Chong, including the regional commander's incident and Wang Chong's assault on Wuxiang. In this meeting, Gao Xianji had treated Wang Chong so courteously, partly because Wang Chong had been willing to put aside their former enmity and brave the danger of leading an army to reinforce him. As for Wang Chong's military skills and other aspects. Although Wang Chong had been able to defeat Umar, as a top-class great general on the level of Gao Xianji, who had won countless victories and had experienced far more than ordinary generals, he had not left a very deep impression on Wang Chong. But when Wang Chong said these words, revealing his comprehensive plans for the Battle of Talas, Gao Xianji felt for the first time that this youth possessed a vast breadth of knowledge, a strategic and long-term vision that could make any protector general or great general lose their luster. Astounding talent. Gao Xianji had always been a proud man, but he had never imagined that he would see another person, and a youth at that, a talent that far surpassed his own. Everything will be done according to Lord Protector General's wishes. If Lord Protector General has anything that requires the cooperation of the Anxi Protectorate Army, this Gao will give it his all. Chapter 889. There's no need for that. Lord Protector General only needs to carry on as before. The city of Talas's high and thick walls provide a natural advantage. Standing on the walls, one can look down and see all the movements of the Arabs. In this aspect, I will require Milord's cooperation. Wang Chong grinned. Okay. Gao Xianji nodded, gaining a new understanding of Wang Chong. The Anxi Protectorate Army was different from the other armies of the Tang dynasty. In the Anxi Protectorate Army, Gao Xianji possessed absolute authority and prestige. Even if he gave command of the Anxi Protectorate Army to Wang Chong would still find it very difficult to command the Anxi Protectorate Army. Moreover, although the two armies belonged to the Tang dynasty, their systems were different. If they were forced to work together, they would only clash with each other, going against their original goal. Wang Chong had rejected Gao Xianji's suggestion and left the Anxi Protectorate Army under Gao Xianji's command. The two of them would work together independently, and this was actually the best arrangement. It would preserve Gao Xianji's status while maximizing the fighting power of the two armies. This made Gao Xianji's impression of Wang Chong soar. Wang Chong. I'll kill you. Just as the two of them were talking, a fierce wind blew, and a roar, like the roar of a lion, came from the city gate. This roar was so sudden that it instantly attracted everyone's attention. Even Wang Chong subconsciously turned his head. Bzzz. In a flash of light, a massive figure charged out of the city gate like a bolt of lightning. Hand over your life for me. The gale was vast, and the airwaves were rolling. Before anyone could react, the tall figure that was like a bolt of lightning had already grasped a huge black iron axe, which brought up thousands upon thousands of torrents of aura energy, and fiercely chopped down towards Wang Chong with a momentum that could split the sky and split the earth. Before the axe fell, the terrifying storm-like upstanding chi had already swept out in all directions, forcing the generals of the Tang dynasty to retreat. Ong! A roar that sounded neither human nor beast came from the void. Behind that tall figure, light and shadow flickered and the void twisted. A 9 feet tall monster with the head of a bull and the body of a human, clad in armor and covered in long fur, appeared out of thin air. It merged with the tall figure and gave off a terrifying aura that was unyielding, mighty, and filled with the desire to destroy. No! Wanha Peiluo, stop! Are you crazy? He's Chishi Protector General. Cries of alarm rang out from all directions, everyone stunned by the actions of the Karluk tribe leader Wanha Peiluo. Wanha Peiluo, hurry and stop. Don't be so rude to the Protector General. Anshi Vice Protector General Qing Qianli's eyes flashed with cold light as he stepped forward, his sword pointed at Wanha Peiluo's barbaric god axe. But in a flash of light, Wanha Peiluo seemed to have predicted that Qing Qianli would use this move, and he twisted his body to dodge Qing Qianli's attack. You! Qing Qianli's expression froze, and he couldn't help but stop. Qing Qianli was a peak brigadier general of the empire, extremely powerful. Although Wanha Peiluo couldn't compare to Qing Qianli, he wasn't too far off. More importantly, Wanha Peiluo had led the Karluk tribe and fought alongside the Anshi Protectorate Army for more than 10 years, so he had a deep understanding of the Anshi Protectorate Army. This was why Qing Qianli's attack had failed. Wanha Peiluo dodged past Qing Qianli, and with no more obstacles in front of him, the barbaric god axe in his hand fiercely swung down at Wang Chong. Humph, Wanha Peiluo, you've come at just the right time. A furious roar resounded through the sky. While everyone else was stunned by this sight, only Wang Chong remained calm, apparently having expected this. Buzz! As everyone looked on, Wang Chong's eyes exploded with cold light. For a radius of 3 zhang around him, the space around him began to twist and distort. Waves of energy began to blur as the images of the sun and moon, one gold and one red, appeared. Vast heaven-earth art. Great yin-yang art. Wang Chong's body suddenly shot forward, the 2 strongest techniques of the great yin-yang heaven creation art clashing with Wanha Peiluo's barbaric god splits the heavens. Boom! 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 Shockwaves surged, and all the air within a radius of several hundred feet exploded in all directions. In a few short moments, Wang Chong and Wanha Peiluo were like 2 primordial beasts, exchanging dozens of blows. Boom! After the final exchange, Wanha Peiluo's body swayed as he was sent flying. Meanwhile, Wang Chong was like a rock in the raging sea, stopping his attack and remaining motionless on the spot. The moment Wang Chong stopped his attack, the raging waves of air calmed down. The great yin-yang heaven creation art's ability to control the environment far surpassed any other art. Bastard! I'll tear you apart. On the other side, Wanha Peiluo's eyes were red as he gnashed his teeth. His body had barely landed on the ground when he staggered back a few steps, but he immediately stomped his feet and charged forward like a storm. Stop! A thunderous roar, suffused with boundless authority, resounded in everyone's ears. Before Wanha Peiluo could get very far, rumble. The void shook, and a mountainous wave of energy locked onto Wanha Peiluo. Wanha Peiluo, brimming with rage and killing intent, was locked down by this energy, causing his body to sink and his speed to drop. When he sensed the fury in this energy, Wanha Peiluo's body trembled and he came to a halt. In all of Talas, in the Tang dynasty's army, there was only one person who could exert this sort of pressure on him, Gao Xianji. Lord Protector General, this bastard dares to detain our tribesmen in the rear. No matter what, I must kill him today. If Milord still remembers our past friendship, then help me kill him to vent the hatred in the hearts of the tens of thousands of Karluks. Wanha Peiluo fiercely turned his head to Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji, his eyes hateful. The Karluks were valiant and skilled in battle, and they were famed throughout the western regions. All the tribes revered them, and as an ally of the Tang dynasty in the western regions, Wanha Peiluo was like the noon sun, with almost no one daring to lightly provoke them. But Wanha Peiluo had never imagined that while he was fighting beyond the borders, he would be attacked from the rear. All his tribesmen, whether old or weak, women or children, even their cows, sheep, and horses, had been captured by the Tang people and brought to the battlefield as hostages. And the main culprit was this teenage Chishi commander before him. Wanha Peiluo had always been proud and arrogant, so he could not endure this sort of humiliation. Wanha Peiluo, calm down and don't be impulsive. Wang Chong is the young marquis of the Tang dynasty and also Chishi Protector General. He is not someone you can touch as you please. If something really does happen, not even I can protect you. Moreover, Lord Protector General is not an unreasonable person. I believe that he has his reasons for doing this. There is no harm in listening to what Lord Protector General has to say. Gao Xianji sternly said. Wanha Peiluo was powerful and had a vicious appearance. There were few people in the Anshi Protectorate army who could suppress him, and only Gao Xianji was capable of doing so. As for the Karluks in the rear, Wanha Peiluo had run to him 5 or 6 days ago to complain, causing a huge uproar. At the height of the battle, Wanha Peiluo had even led his tribesmen into hiding in Talas, throwing a tantrum and refusing to fight. Because Gao Xianji was at Talas, he had no idea what was going on in the rear, so he had no way of appeasing them. And now that Wang Chong had led more than 100,000 Chishi reinforcements to the battlefield and saved the Anshi Protectorate army, this matter had become even more difficult to deal with. On one side was an ally that he had fought alongside for 10-some years, and on the other side was the Chishi Protector General whom he had owed a debt of gratitude to. Even someone of Gao Xianji's status found it difficult to choose. But no matter what, Gao Xianji was confident that Wang Chong had his reasons. This bastard. What other reason can he have? I won't let him off. Wanha Peiluo's eyes were red as he glared at Wang Chong, his entire body seething with rage. If looks could kill, Wang Chong would have died countless times over. Truly a stubborn nature. With a wave of his hand, Wang Chong began to slowly walk toward Wanha Peiluo. His movements were calm, but there was a hint of majesty about him. As he walked, a powerful pressure erupted from his body like a storm. This pressure forced the surrounding Tang dynasty generals to retreat. The only people around the gates of Talas that could endure this pressure were Gao Xianji, Qing Qianli, and Wanha Peiluo. Wang Chong was getting stronger by the day, and though he had only been in the western regions for a short time, he had already slain 2 brigadier generals. Wanha Peiluo was powerful and infamous, but he was not more formidable than Dian Mangpoj or a good Ulan. In a one-on-one battle, Wang Chong was 80% confident that he could personally kill him. Wanha Peiluo, you went back on your word and accepted bribes from the Arabs, intending to sell out the 30,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army. Did you think that I didn't know about all of this? Wang Chong's eyes were chilling as he stopped in front of Wanha Peiluo and harshly rebuked him. Bang! His words were earth-shattering. Everyone was stunned by Wang Chong's words. Wanha Peiluo colluded with the Arabs. How could this be? The Karluks have fought side by side with us for 10-some years, never abandoning us. How could they betray us? Lord Protector General, could there be a mistake? Could there be some sort of misunderstanding? Everyone looked at Wang Chong, finding this matter far too absurd. They simply couldn't believe that the Karluks would collude with the Arabs and betray the Tang dynasty. After so many years of war, the Karluks and the Anshi Protectorate army had become extremely close. From an emotional standpoint, none of the soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate army could accept that the Karluks would betray them. However, no one noticed that Wanha Peiluo, who was behind them, suddenly twitched, as if he had been stabbed. "Bastard! Don't slander me. This old man will kill you." Wanha Peluo roared, his eyes red and his entire body seething with killing intent. Whoosh! The black barbaric god axe trembled as it prepared to fly through the air once more. But unlike before, Wanha Peluo seemed to be using 120,000 of his strength this time. "Mengen, pass on my order. If Wanha Peluo dares to make the slightest move, kill the entire Karluk tribe, along with their livestock and horses. Don't leave a single one alive." Wang Chong disdainfully sneered at this sight, his body not even moving. "Yes, milord." Bang! Like a bolt of lightning, Wanha Peluo found it hard to breathe, his entire body going cold. The axe in his hand trembled, and he found himself unable to swing it again. Even that monstrous murderous aura instantly disappeared like a punctured ball. Wang Chang's simple words had grasped his weak point, completely stifling Wanha Peluo's rage and preventing him from venting it. Chapter 890. In a flash, Wanha Peluo's eyes once more turned incomparably red, almost dripping with blood. As one of the illustrious and ambitious figures of the western regions, Wanha Peluo had always been respected and feared. No one had ever dared to use his tribesmen as a hostage like Wang Chong. To Wanha Peluo, this was the ultimate humiliation. Wang Chong only coldly chuckled, completely disregarding Wanha Peluo. His gaze slowly scanned the crowd, quickly settling on Anshi Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli and Protector General Gao Xianji. Unlike the other Anshi generals, whether it was Cheng Qianli or Protector General Gao Xianji, these two supreme commanders of Anshi were calm, far less agitated than the others. Wang Chong inwardly smiled as if he understood something. "Wanha Peluo, don't act rashly. Don't blame me for not warning you, but the western regions belong to the Tang dynasty. The Karluk tribe only has its current status because the Tang dynasty promoted you, but this does not mean that you can stand on equal footing with us. If you dare to act rashly, you will be offending your superiors. I don't even need a reason to uproot the entire Karluk tribe." Wang Chong looked down at Wanha Peluo. His eyes were cold, as if he could see into the depths of Wanha Peluo's heart. When Wang Chong was recruiting mercenaries in the western regions, he had killed a chicken to warn the monkeys, exterminating a fickle and treacherous Saka to serve as a warning to all the other tribes. But in Wang Chong's mind, the people he wanted to kill the most were not the Saka, but the Karluk tribe. They were the most fickle tribe in the western regions. The Karluks colluding with Arabia and betraying the Arabs on the battlefield had enormous repercussions, far worse than any ordinary act of treachery. But the Karluks and Wanha Peluo had been recruited by Gao Xianji, so Wang Chong could not casually act against them. "Lord Protector General, could there be a mistake? Could it be another tribe? The Karluks have fought alongside us for so many years and have always been honest and reliable, never betraying us. How could they possibly collude with the Arabs?" At the gate, a general of the Anshi Protectorate Army couldn't help but step forward. "That's right. Humans are not birds or beasts. How can we be emotionless? We've fought side by side for so long, and our bonds are so deep. Anyone can betray us, but the Karluks are the least likely to do so." Another officer of the Anshi Protectorate Army stepped forward and said. It wasn't that they didn't believe in Wang Chong, but the friendship between Wanha Peluo and the Anshi Protectorate Army had been forged through one bloody battle after another. From an emotional standpoint, they found it very difficult to believe Wang Chong's words. Wang Chong shook his head inwardly when he saw this. Humans and beasts were different, and so were the Han and the Hu. The Anshi Protectorate Army had been completely unprepared for the Karluk tribe's rebellion, and someone had even stepped forward to speak for them. It was no wonder that he had not appeared. The Battle of Talas had ended in such a terrible defeat, with the Karluks switching sides and the Anshi Protectorate Army having been given a path of retreat. Not even 1,000 soldiers had managed to escape. There's nothing impossible in this world. Don't forget that the Karluks are mercenaries, not the regular army of our great Tang. The reason they're willing to fight alongside us isn't because they have a deep relationship with us, but because the pay we offer is high enough. Wang Chang's eyes slowly scanned the crowd. In a flash, all the Anshi generals fell silent. They naturally understood what Wang Chong was saying, but over time, they had all forgotten that the Karluks were different from them. In truth, they could have betrayed the Tang, but they just didn't want to believe it. As Wang Chong took in the expressions on their faces, he inwardly sighed. Rome wasn't built in a day, and it was impossible to change the impression the Anshi Protectorate army had of the Karluks in a short period of time. But there were some words that Wang Chong had to say to wake up the Anshi Protectorate army. Otherwise, there would be a second and a third Karluk tribe in the future. Mercenaries only fight for the reward. They fight for whoever offers the highest price. In the last 10-some years, the Tang dynasty has always offered the highest price, and the Anshi Protectorate army has always been invincible. The Karluks only need to wave their banners and shout their battle cries as they chase after the enemy. The Karluks would naturally do something with such little risk and high reward. This is the true reason they haven't betrayed us. They haven't betrayed us not because they are loyal and reliable, but because there is no benefit or reason to betray us. In addition, never forget that benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust are things that only we Han have. The Hu only care about the weak being prey to the strong, following whoever is stronger. Benevolence and righteousness are of no use to them. Wang Chong declared. These words weren't just directed at Wanha Peiluo and the Karluks. The Tang dynasty's benevolence and righteousness had allowed the common people to live and work in peace, allowing the Central Plains to prosper. But in the eyes of the world, the benevolence and righteousness of the Central Plains and the morals of the Confucian school were of no use. Lions and tigers could roar through the forest and rule over all beasts by relying on their overwhelming strength, not benevolence and righteousness. The cruel forest that was the world was the same. Wanha Peiluo, I'll give you one more chance. In front of everyone, if you come clean, I can still spare your life. Otherwise, all the Karluks will die. Wang Chong stared at Wanha Peiluo, his expression cruel and callous. Wang Chong's callous gaze caused Wanha Peiluo's heart to clench, but he quickly returned to normal. Bastard! I have no idea what you're talking about. Lord Protector General, our Karluks have fought with you for 10-some years. Even if we haven't done much, we've still worked hard. In the end, is this how you treat us? Wanha Peiluo ignored Wang Chong and turned to Gao Xianji, his eyes brimming with rage. This young Tang dynasty protector general had come with a menacing aura and was extremely difficult to deal with. At a time like this, Wanha Peiluo could only place his hopes on Gao Xianji. Wanha Peiluo, calm down. Protector General Wang isn't someone who doesn't understand reason and makes trouble out of nothing. He must have his reasons for doing this. Gao Xianji sternly said. After saying this, he turned to Wang Chong. Protector General Wang, Wanha Peiluo, and the Karluks are friends of our Anshi Protectorate army. We have worked together for many years, and they are worthy of our trust. If Protector General Wang believes that Wanha Peiluo is colluding with the Arabs, I hope that Lord Protector General can produce conclusive evidence so that the soldiers will be convinced. Wang Chong smiled, keenly sensing a few things from Gao Xianji's final words. Lord Protector General is wise. Wanha Peiluo, death is at hand, but you're still struggling. It seems like you won't give up until you reach the Yellow River. Wang Chong lightly snapped his fingers as he coldly stared at Wanha Peiluo. Humph, Wang Chong, you slander us, saying that we're colluding with the Arabs. If you can't produce convincing evidence, I, Wanha Peiluo, swear to the heavens that no matter the price, I will cut you into 1,000 pieces to vent the hatred in my heart. Wanha Peiluo fiercely gripped the barbaric god axe, his expression savage. Although he said this, in reality, the confident and indifferent expression on Wang Chong's face made Wanha Peiluo feel rather uneasy. Wanha Peiluo, since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. Wang Chong grinned and waved a hand behind him. Shui Qianjun, bring it up. Wang Chong's words instantly caused the atmosphere to tense. Everyone turned to look, and Wan Hapelua's heart began to thump as he began to panic. He had been so calm because he was certain that Wang Chong had no evidence. But if Wang Chong brought out evidence, everything would be completely different. Tap. Tap. A few moments later, heavy footsteps came from the rear. As the Anxi generals and spectators watched, Shui Qianjun strode forward, his body ramrod straight and fully armored, accompanied by 4 burly soldiers with bulging temples. These 4 soldiers each took a corner, and they quickly appeared in front of the crowd, each of them carrying a massive and ornate treasure chest made of fine gold. Pong, the 4 of them tossed it with all their might, and the heavy treasure chest immediately landed heavily on the ground with a deafening boom. Amidst the rumbling, everyone could hear a strange sound coming from the treasure chest. It was as if thousands of small things were swaying and colliding inside. Clang! Shui Qianjuan's expression was indifferent. The moment the 4 soldiers put down the chest, he unsheathed his saber, shattering the lock on the chest, and then pushed open the lid. Bang! The sight of the contents of the chest caused an uproar. The chest was densely packed with all kinds of pearls, agates, emeralds, corals, and gems. Its value was immeasurable. When Wan Hapeluo saw this, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His breathing became ragged. Protector General Wang, what is this? Cheng Qianli's eyes widened as he asked. Lord Protector General, General Cheng, and soldiers of Anxi, I found this chest of pearls and agates in a secret cave in the Karluk tribe. This many pearls, agates, and emeralds shouldn't have been gifted by Lord Protector General, right? Or did the mercenary Karluks learn to trade and make money? Wang Chong said to the crowd. The crowd buzzed with chatter as the Anxi Protectorate Army soldiers stared at the dazzling array of pearls and gems in the chest, a strange expression on their faces. The Anxi Protectorate Army and the Karluks had a long-term employment relationship, paying them a generous reward every time they completed a mission. But not even the Anxi Protectorate Army could afford to pay the Karluks such an enormous sum. Whether it was pearls, agates, or emeralds, they were all far more valuable than gold of the same size. This chest of pearls, agates, and emeralds was so valuable that even the finance officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army found it difficult to calculate its value. Moreover, Wan Hapeluo and the Karluks had always been extravagant, not thrifty people. Every time they returned from a victory, they would spend as much as they wanted. Not even 10 some years could have accumulated so much wealth. Lord Protector General, is this really all from the Karluks? An officer of the Anxi Protectorate Army asked in a daze as he stared at the dazzling chest of treasures. Previously, no matter what Wang Chong had said, no one in the Anxi Protectorate Army would believe that the Karluks were colluding with the Arabs. But now that Wang Chong had taken out this chest of treasures, everything had changed. At the very least, the firm conviction in their hearts had begun to waver. Ha! Wang Chong chuckled and shook his head. As everyone watched, he slowly raised a finger. Chapter 891. Rumble. Hearing that there were 9 more chests of such treasures, even Cheng Qianli couldn't help but widen his eyes. 1 chest of treasures could barely be explained, but 10 chests of pearls, jade, and jewels. Even if the Karluks had been starving for 10 some years, they still wouldn't have been able to accumulate so much wealth. Not even a fool would believe that such a massive treasure had appeared in the Karluk tribe without any suspicions. In an instant, all eyes turned suspiciously to the leader of the Karluks, Wan Hapeluo. Wang Chong, don't slander me. Wan Hapeluo finally couldn't help but angrily yell. I've never seen these things before, so I have no idea what's going on. Moreover, our Karluks are a hired tribe. Do we have to tell you everything? The western regions once had many ancient kingdoms that left behind vast amounts of wealth, and there are also many treasure maps and legends that many tribes are still searching for. Do I have to tell you all of this? Wanha Peluo angrily said. Wanha Peluo had never felt such a strong threat from a single person. Wang Chang's aura was on full display, his aggressive aura making it difficult for Wanha Peluo to resist. This was something he had never encountered in his life. Damn it, just what's going on here? This matter is extremely secretive, so how did he know? Wanha Peluo felt like he had seen a ghost. From start to finish, the entire affair had proceeded smoothly, without the slightest mistake. On the battlefield, Wanha Peluo had bravely killed his foes without the slightest flaw. Wanha Peluo had even prepared to borrow the strength of the Arabs to rule over the western regions after the Tang dynasty's defeat. But who could have expected that on the night that Wanha Peluo was prepared to switch sides and open the gates to let the Arabs into the city, he would suddenly receive a letter. All of Wanha Peluo's plans had been thrown into disarray. Even now, Wanha Peluo still didn't know where he had gone wrong. How could a young protector general in the distant Chishi know about his affairs in the western regions, and such a secret? Wanha Peluo could only be described as seeing a ghost. Wanha Peluo's excuse quickly took effect, and the story of the treasure map was quickly accepted by the crowd. Although it was still rather abrupt, it was much more believable than the Karluks betraying the Tang dynasty and colluding with Arabia. There was a subtle change in the surrounding atmosphere. The gazes everyone looked at Wanha Peluo with became much gentler. Ha ha ha, treasure map. Wang Chong sneered, as if he had already expected Wanha Peluo to say this. So, is this also the reason for the treasure map? Wang Chang's palm pressed down on the treasure chest. Bang! Shockwaves radiated in all directions, and the tens of thousands of pearls, agates, jadites, and gemstones in the treasure chest seemed to be pulled by many invisible threads, flying out of the chest and hovering in the air. Everyone was confused at first, but in the next moment, when they saw the dazzling golden light shooting out from the bottom of the box, everyone's expressions changed. Arabian gold coins. At the very bottom of the pearls, agates, and jadites were dazzling round gold coins, layer upon layer, covering the bottom of the treasure chest. These round gold coins were completely different from the gold and silver of the Tang dynasty. The workmanship of these gold coins was extremely exquisite, and the surface was engraved with the image of a man with wavy hair. In terms of appearance, it was identical to the Arabs. And on the back of the gold coins, ding! Amidst the clattering of armor, an Anshi Protectorate army officer strode forward, took out a gold coin from the bottom of the chest, and flipped it over. It's an Arabian gold coin. On the back of the coin was the banner of the Arabs. Everything was clear at a glance. This was no treasure map, nor was it some treasure left behind by an ancient kingdom of the western regions. This was something that belonged to the Arabian Empire. In order to bribe the Karluks, these people had offered unimaginable riches. Wanha Peluo, you bastard! The surrounding Anshi generals stared at Wanha Peluo with killing intent, and one of the Anshi generals closest to Wanha Peluo angrily roared as he unsheathed the sword at his waist and slashed at Wanha Peluo. Bang! Waves of air rumbled. In the blink of an eye, a vast wave of chi and the black god of Berserker's axe shot out and blocked the thunderous strike. This is a false accusation. This is definitely a false accusation. Don't be impulsive. Don't be fooled by this brat. Wanha Peluo's face contorted as he screamed and retreated, hurriedly raising his weapon to block. Our Karluk tribe has fought side by side with you so many times. Have all of you forgotten? During the battle against Che Shiqian, we covered your left flank. Also, during the battle against Kongju, we sneaked into the city and helped you open the city gate. Also, during the battle against Kenjuti, we saved many of your men. Have you all forgotten all these? Just like all of you, I was on the front lines and had no idea what was going on with those Arab gold coins. Someone must have framed us. Yes. Our Karluk tribe has so many enemies in the western regions. They must have known of our relationship with the Tang dynasty and used this scheme to deal with us. They wanted to use this method to sow dissension so that they could profit from it. No matter what, we can't let them succeed. Wanha Peluo grieved, his face filled with grief and indignation. Wanha Peluo's words caused the crowd to begin to hesitate once more. It was true that the Karluk tribe and the Anshi Protectorate Army had offended many people over the years. It was completely possible for these people to work together to frame the Karluk tribe. When Wanha Peluo brought up those past events, the crowd found it even more difficult to bear, and the suspicions they had about Wanha Peluo and the Karluk tribe gradually began to loosen. Even Gao Xianji began to frown, a look of pity in his eyes. Wang Chong's eyes flickered at this sight. Wang Chong did not know the story between the Karluk tribe and the Anshi Protectorate Army. If everything was the same as before, it would truly be a legend. But Wang Chong was well aware that this was all wishful thinking. The Karluk tribe was a mercenary army, and they would always fight for their own interests. This was something that could never be changed. Wang Chong pitied the friendship between the Anshi Protectorate Army and the Karluk tribe, but Wang Chong also knew that it was an indisputable fact that the Karluk tribe was colluding with the Arabs. Those pearls, agates, jadeite, and gems were ironclad proof. If they had succeeded, the consequences would have been unthinkable. The reluctance in the hearts of the Anshi Protectorate Army was nothing more than wishful thinking. The Anshi Protectorate Army's loyalty was nothing more than a bargaining chip for the Karluks to trade with the Arabs. In the eyes of the Anshi Protectorate Army, the loyal Karluk tribe who had gone through thick and thin with the Arabs would not hesitate in the slightest when it was time to rebel, much less show any mercy. Countless soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army had not died at the hands of the Arabs, but had died unjustly at the hands of the Karluk tribe. It was precisely because the Anshi Protectorate Army had been completely unprepared for the Karluk tribe's rebellion that less than 1,000 soldiers of the Anshi Protectorate Army had managed to escape. When he thought about how Wanha Peluo was still deceiving the Anshi Protectorate Army and using their emotions to weasel his way out of the situation, Wang Chong felt waves of disgust and loathing for the Karluk tribe. Gao Xianji might have been deceived by them, but not Wang Chong. Wanha Peluo, there's no need to quibble. You can say that the matter of the Arabian gold coins was a trap, but what about that Arab spy who colluded with you? Don't forget, he met you. You believed that your plan was flawless, but you probably didn't expect that we would capture this person. Since you're still trying to weasel your way out of the situation, let's bring him over for questioning. Xue Qianjun, bring that Arab spy over. In addition, find a translator. Let everyone hear what's going on. Wang Chong bellowed as he turned to the chilling Xue Qianjun and ordered. Yes, my lord. Xue Qianjun loudly replied, and then he immediately began to walk toward the rear, his expression devoid of hesitation. It was clear that he had been prepared for this. Buzz. Wanha Peluo, who had been screaming that he was being wronged, instantly paled at this sight. He could still argue about the matter of the Arabian gold coins, and he could still rely on the camaraderie they had built up over the years to convince the Anshi Protectorate Army officers, but now that the Arab spy was brought up, no matter how much Wanha Peluo tried to argue, it was useless. Impossible. Just how did he do it? Wanha Peluo's mind was reeling in shock. He simply couldn't understand how this young Protector General, who had always been active outside of Anshi, could know so much. Even more unbelievable was how the disguised Arab spy who had infiltrated the Karluks had ended up in Wang Chong's hands. That had been more than 2 months ago. And he clearly remembered that he had already returned to the Arabian Empire. Had something happened to him and he hadn't returned? Or perhaps he had run off to contact him, which was how he had ended up in the hands of this young Chishi Protector General. Wanha Peluo's mind was in turmoil as countless thoughts flitted through his mind. What shocked and panicked Wanha Peluo the most was that Wang Chong's subordinate was already escorting an Arab whose hands were tied behind his back and whose head was covered with a cloth. This Arab was currently being escorted toward him. From his figure, he could tell that this was the Arab who had first contacted him. Roar! Wanha Peluo roared, his hair standing on end as he finally couldn't hold back any longer. While everyone's attention was focused on the Hu being escorted by Xue Qianjun, this illustrious Karluk leader of the western regions suddenly exploded with fury. Brat, you're too vicious. Gully, send a signal to the Arabs. In addition, inform all the tribesmen in the city to attack together. Everyone else, come with me and kill him. Chapter 892. Humph. Stubborn fool. Wang Chong coldly sneered, a harsh light in his eyes. Although Wanha Pelua's sudden attack was abrupt, Wang Chong had apparently predicted it. Boom! As Wanha Peluo and his tribesmen attacked, Wang Chong's body exploded into the air like a hawk. Clang! The countless plates of armor on his body clattered to the ground. Clang! The Wuxia steel sword on Wang Chong's body exploded with countless rays of sword qi that slashed at Wanha Peluo. But while Wang Chong was fast, someone else was even faster than Wang Chong. Wanha Peluo, you've truly disappointed me far too much. A loud, thunderous voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. The voice was filled with deep disappointment. Upon hearing this voice, the savage Karluk leader Wanha Peluo seemed to be pricked by something. His entire body trembled, and he almost lost his grip on the giant axe in his hand. He cried out involuntarily, "Who are you?" "Lord Protector General." Wanha Peluo was infamous and never admitted defeat. Wang Chong was not qualified to make him utter the words Lord Protector General. In the entire army, only the Anshi war god, Gao Xianji, could do so. Rumble. Before Wanha Peluo could finish speaking, a storm of destructive energy suddenly appeared in Wanha Peluo's perception, approaching him with astonishing speed. Wanha Peluo's face instantly turned as white as paper. Boom! Two heaven-shaking booms resounded through the air, and as countless people looked on in fear, three figures collided near the gates of Talas. Majestic stellar energy surged out like a tsunami, sweeping away the surrounding crowd. In a radius of 100 zhang, everyone was pushed to the side, none of them able to stand. Not good. Be careful. Their shockwaves are too strong. Retreat quickly, that it was chaos all around. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and Wanha Peluo were all peak experts of the Tang dynasty. A battle between experts of this level was not something that experts of other levels could approach, much less interfere in. But the chaos disappeared as quickly as it came. The overwhelming and powerful stellar energy waves disappeared in the blink of an eye. By the time the surrounding people got up from the ground, the clouds had dispersed and the rain had stopped. The battle was already over. My lord! Xue Qianjun crawled up from the ground in a suit of armor. He was just about to join the battle when he raised his head and saw the scene in front of him. He was stunned. In front of the city gate, Wang Chong stood motionless, his back to him. One hand gripped the wood steel sword, the other gripping Karluk chief Wanha Peluo's neck, his feet off the ground as he raised him high into the air. Wanha Peluo struggled as hard as he could, but to no avail. Wang Chong's palm was like a pair of iron pincers, firmly holding him in place. And next to the pair, Gao Xianji stood like a towering mountain, motionless and motionless. Everything was frozen in place, as if time had stopped. No one knew what had just happened, but there was no question that the battle was over. No matter how formidable Wanha Peluo was, he could not possibly contend against two protector generals of the Tang dynasty working together. Lord Protector General, Lord Protector General. I've been wrongly accused. Listen to my explanation. Wanha Peluo's face was pale and his expression panicked as he struggled. Although Wang Chong had gripped his neck, the true lethal attack had come from Anshi Protector General Gao Xianji. Even though he had been greatly weakened by the successive battles, a peak Saint Martial existence like a great general was not someone that Wanha could compare to. Gao Xianji had not killed him, but he had sealed off all the acupuncture points in his body. Wanha had a body full of strength, but he could not use it. Wanha, you've truly disappointed me. Before everyone's gazes, Gao Xianji finally spoke. There was an indescribable coldness on his face. 2 months of fierce battle had not broken him, but the betrayal of the Karluks had left this invincible Anshi war god feeling a deep exhaustion. I don't mind that you accepted the gold and silver of the Arabs. After all, the Karluks are mercenaries, and there's no reason to reject the gold and silver of a competitor. Even if you take it, you don't necessarily have to work for them. But for the sake of 10 chests of gold and silver, you actually wanted to betray the Tang dynasty, collude with the Arabs, and lead bandits into the pass. You've truly disappointed me. It turns out that 10 years of fighting shoulder to shoulder was only worth 10 chests of gold and silver. Milord, it's not like this, it's not like this. Wanha face was ghastly pale, his body hovering in the air, his hands struggling against Wang Chang's palms, but to no avail. It's not like this. You're right. The Arabs naturally didn't just give you 10 chests of gold and silver. If my guess is correct, the Arabs must have promised you that once the Anshi Protectorate army was destroyed, they would do everything in their power to support you and the Karluks in ruling the western regions. Wang Chong coldly sneered as he gazed at Wanha, his words piercing through his heart. Buzz. Wanha had been struggling, but these words seemed to deal a heavy blow. His face paled even more, and his hands powerlessly dropped to the ground. Wang Chong looked at Wanha, his eyes brimming with derision. Mercenaries had no morals to speak of. In their eyes, everything had a price tag, and the only thing that mattered was whether someone could pay it. Wanha and the Karluks had believed themselves to be a secret, but how could they have escaped his notice? If he had not appeared at the Battle of Talas, the Anshi Protectorate army would have been destroyed, and the Tang dynasty would not have had enough soldiers, quickly losing Anshi, Qixi, and the entire western regions. And the Karluks had defected at the last moment. As the heroes who had dealt a heavy blow to the Anshi Protectorate army, they had truly reaped the greatest benefits after the battle. After the western regions, without the Tang dynasty, they had become one of the strongest factions in the western regions. But there were times when the plans of man outstripped those of the heavens. After the Battle of Talas, the Arabian Empire had originally planned to unite the western regions, the Tang dynasty, the Turks, the Uzan, and any other place it could see. Alas, the Arabs had made a strategic mistake. After defeating the Tang dynasty, they had pushed into the plateau, intending to conquer the nearby Uzan Empire, completely unaware of the altitude sickness. In the end, they had suffered a heavy blow there and had been forced to halt their expansion. The Karluks' dream of acting as Arabia's agent and ruling over the western regions had been shattered. But even so, the Karluks had been the greatest beneficiaries of the Battle of Talas. The entire tribe had flourished like never before. The honest and trustworthy, the loyal to their country, had been buried in a foreign land, never to have a good end. Meanwhile, the treacherous had grown stronger and flourished. There was nothing in the world more ironic than this. When the former Wang Chong had heard of the crushing defeat at Talas and the success of the Karluks, he could only clench his fists in helplessness. But now that they had come back to life, the Karluks were delusional to think that they could rely on betraying the Tang dynasty and the Anshi Protectorate army to obtain glory and wealth. Ha! Suddenly, a long sigh came from next to him. Gao Xianji glanced at Wanha and shook his head, disappointment in his eyes. Wanha, did you really think that you could hide your actions from me? Bzzz. Wanha body trembled as he raised his head, his eyes wide as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. In truth, I already had a feeling and a few guesses. But after all these years of life and death, I didn't believe that you would betray me. Long before we left for the Shur kingdom and took Talas, someone told me that you were colluding with the Arabs and preparing to betray the Tang dynasty. But at the time, I didn't believe it, so I suppressed all those voices. After 2 months of fierce fighting, the Karluks suddenly refused to fight and even deliberately made trouble. I knew all of this, but I pretended not to know. Even at night, when some strange birds flew over the city and landed in a Karluk camp, I didn't investigate. Wanha Peluo, do you know why? Gao Xianji turned his head to Wanha Peluo. All was deathly still. Wanha Peluo did not speak, but the light in his eyes slowly dimmed. All this time, he had believed that he had done everything without anyone knowing. He had never imagined that Gao Xianji had already known. Those who walk different paths can't make plans together. These mercenaries only fight for money and have never received the influence of benevolence, righteousness, or morality. In the end, they're not our kind of people. Wang Chong finally spoke. Gao Xianji and Qing Qianli, the 2 Anxi protector generals, had reacted far too calmly. When he had criticized Wanha Peluo, they had not reacted at all, as if they had predicted this would happen. Wang Chong had found it strange at the time. Even if he had been on guard, why had such a thing happened in the end? But now, Wang Chong understood that it could all be summed up in one word: too soft-hearted. Although Gao Xianji was known for his callous and unyielding image, that was only to his enemies. To the people at his side, to those he trusted, he had a completely different side, warm and soft. Gao Xianji was a Hu. But he was a Hu who admired the glory of the Tang dynasty and the culture of the Central Plains. He had also received the most orthodox education of the Han Confucian school and the culture of the Central Plains. In this aspect, although he looked like a Hu on the outside, he was a pure Han at heart. In this aspect, he was completely different from Wanha Peluo and the other Hu. When one interacted with Gao Xianji, his bearing and demeanor made it easy for one to forget his identity and feel that he was no different from a Han, inspiring admiration. But the compassionate cannot command soldiers, and Gao Xianji's soft-heartedness had ultimately led to the destruction of the Anxi Protectorate army, the fall of the western regions, and his future death. A general could not be soft-hearted, because a moment of soft-heartedness would lead to an unimaginably massive disaster that would eventually lead to unimaginable casualties. In this aspect, even though Gao Xianji was known as the war god of the western regions, he was still not a qualified commander. Chapter 893. Wanha Peluo, I gave you a chance. Everything was your choice, and I have nothing else to say. Protector General Wang, it's no longer appropriate for me to appear in this matter. I'll leave the rest to you. Gao Xianji turned his head, his back to Wanha Peluo. He closed his eyes and no longer spoke, a trace of sorrow appearing on his resolute face. The most difficult thing in the world to accept was not encountering a powerful foe, but the betrayal of one's own people. If possible, Gao Xianji would never have wanted everything to fall to this level. Lord Protector General, be at ease. I know what to do. He won't feel any pain. Wang Chong froze for a moment, and then he spoke, a hint of surprise in his eyes. Gao Xianji truly lived up to his reputation as a famous general of his generation, the war god of Anxi. Wang Chong had originally believed that Gao Xianji would plead on Wanha Peluo's behalf for the sake of their friendship, but he hadn't expected him to make such a decision so quickly. This made Wang Chong look at him in a new light. Wanha Peluo, you chose your own path. If you fail, you must pay the price. When you reincarnate in your next life, remember not to make an enemy of the Tang dynasty. This is not something a puny Karluk like you can contend against. Wang Chong raised his head and indifferently said. Wanha Peluo lowered his proud head and said no more. Winner takes all, and that was all. Buzz. Without the slightest hesitation, Wang Chong pushed the great yin-yang heaven creation art to its limits, allowing Wanha Peluo's boundless energy to flow into his body like a raging river. In just a few seconds, Wang Chang's already powerful energy swelled once more. The battle was imminent, and the Arabs were still lingering in the distance. This was an enemy of unprecedented power, and everyone knew that this was a fierce and unpredictable battle. Wang Chong needed even more strength to change the course of this battle. Wanha Pei Luo was the leader of the Karluks and possessed incomparably powerful martial arts. He was a natural furnace, and Wang Chong would not give up on such a high-quality source of strength. Time passed in the blink of an eye. After absorbing Wanha Pei Luo's energy, Wang Chong's strength advanced by leaps and bounds, soaring all the way to the 7th level of the Saint Martial realm. His stellar energy surged like mercury, and his eyes shone like stars. Kacha. Just as Wanha Pei Luo's internal energy was about to be sucked dry, Wang Chong's stellar energy poured in, instantly shattering Wanha Pei Luo's meridians and snapping his neck. Take him away. Give him a slightly more dignified funeral, state his merits, and state that he died because he betrayed the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong slowly put down Wanha Pei Luo's corpse and beckoned behind him. After all, Wanha Pei Luo had worked with the Anxi Protectorate army for many years, and Gao Xianji and the others would probably not be able to accept his death, so they would have to take care of the rest. Yes. Marquis, your subordinate will take care of it. Xue Qianjun quickly took Wanha Pei Luo's corpse away. Thank you. Once Xue Qianjun had left with Wanha Pei Luo's corpse, Gao Xianji finally turned his head and sincerely thanked Wang Chong. A traitor did not deserve a dignified funeral. Wang Chong's willingness to write down his achievements on his tombstone was clearly taking into consideration the sentiments of the Anxi Protectorate army. Wang Chong only nodded and said nothing more. Lord Protector General, Wanha Pei Luo is dead, but what about these people? The Vice Protector General of the Anxi Protectorate army, Qing Qianli, said, his words immediately attracting everyone's attention. Wang Chong turned his head and saw that Qing Qianli was standing at the gate of Talas like a mighty Vitra. In his hand was the Karluk leader known as Guli, and around him, the other Karluk leaders had also been captured. While Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were dealing with Wanha Pei Luo, Qing Qianli had also led his men to capture Wanha Pei Luo's subordinates. With Qing Qianli's strength as a peak brigadier general, dealing with these Karluk subordinates was an easy task. Guli and the others hadn't even had a chance to send a signal back into the city. The sight of Qing Qianli and his captured Karluk officers instantly silenced everyone, all eyes focused on Guli and the other Karluk officers. Although Wanha Pei Luo was dead, his subordinates were still alive. How to deal with those Karluks who had not yet received the news and had not yet rebelled was a major problem. Fortunately, Qing Qianli had reacted quickly and stopped them. Otherwise, the city would have been in chaos. Lord Protector General, how many Karluks are left in the city? Wang Chong suddenly stepped forward and asked. There are around 15,000 Karluks in the city, Gao Xianji replied. Isn't that even more than the Anxi Protectorate army? Doesn't that mean they have more soldiers than the Anxi Protectorate army? Isn't that even more than the Anxi Protectorate army? Gao Xianji's tactics couldn't be said to be too wrong. He was using the elite Anxi Protectorate army as the vanguard, with the Karluks and the other mercenaries taking over from the rear. This sort of tactic wasn't a problem when he had the upper hand, but when he ran into a powerful foe, the problem became apparent. The 15,000 Karluk mercenaries were even more than the Anxi Protectorate army. If they rebelled, the consequences would be unthinkable. The Anxi Protectorate army was in no shape to suppress them. This isn't the only thing we're worried about. The Anxi Protectorate army isn't just recruiting Karluks. There are also Furganans and other mercenaries. If the Arabs can find the Karluks and bribe Wanha Pei Luo, they can also bribe other mercenaries, including the Furganans. Qing Qianli said. The Anxi Protectorate army had two major mercenary allies, the Karluks and the Furganans. If the Karluks could betray, the Furganans could do the same. One Karluk was barely enough to deal with, but if even the Furganans could be bribed, the Anxi Protectorate army would truly be in danger. Gao Xianji said nothing, but his thick brows were deeply furrowed. It was clear that he was also worried. Once bitten, twice shy. Although everyone near the city gate had maintained their calm, the Karluk betrayal had dealt an unprecedented blow and shock to all of them. Something that they had once firmly believed had been overturned, and they couldn't help but doubt it. If that's what you're worried about, there's no need for that. Wang Chong gave a carefree smile. He could understand the Anxi general's mood, but the Ferdinand's betrayal was truly a groundless worry. Wang Chong had no way of confirming the other tribes, but the Ferdinands were truly the staunchest allies of the Tang dynasty. This was because Wang Chong clearly remembered that when Gao Xianji and the others had retreated from Talas, before Li Sai had even become his subordinate, the Ferdinands had retreated with them. Moreover, in the White Stone Ridge not far from Talas, the invincible great general Li Sai had killed quite a few Ferdinands, cleaving them in two along with their horses. The White Stone Ridge was not far from Talas, and because so many Ferdinands had retreated, the Ferdinands had been blocked. At the time, the Karluk's sudden defection had dealt a massive blow to the Tibetans, causing them to develop an unprecedented distrust and suspicion of the Hu. The only people on the battlefield who had not fled were the Karluks. The fact that the Ferdinands had fled with them clearly meant that they had not betrayed them or colluded with the Arabs. Later events had proved that the Ferdinands had been wrongly accused. After the Battle of Talas, they had always been the target of suppression. The Karluks had envied them, so they had done everything in their power to humiliate them. In the end, the Ferdinands had managed to survive. Later on, when 5th Prince Li Heng ascended to the throne, he had contacted them, and the two sides had fought side by side. In Wang Chong's view, the Anxi Protectorate Army's suspicion of the Karluks was completely unnecessary. Protector General Wang Qianli and the other Anxi generals turned to look at Wang Chong in surprise. Why is Lord Protector General so certain? The most important task for the Anxi Protectorate Army was to cleanse itself of the suspicion of the Ferdinands and the other mercenaries. The more than 220,000 Arab soldiers were still watching from the outside, and if they could not eliminate the possibility of colluding with the Arabs, the entire Tang army would be in grave danger. It could be attacked from the front and rear at any moment, a fatal threat. In the current situation, Gao Xianji and Qing Qianli, as commanders of the Anxi Protectorate Army, had spent many years with these mercenaries, fighting side by side. Even they could not determine if these people were suspicious or not. On the other hand, an outsider like Wang Chong was certain that there was no problem with the Ferdinands. The generals couldn't help but find this rather strange. As if already knowing what they were thinking, Wang Chong faintly smiled and confidently said, "This isn't too difficult to guess. This isn't too difficult to guess. If the Arabs want to sow discord, they only need to bribe the largest mercenary group. Bribing several mercenaries at the same time seems more reliable, but the more people they bribe, the easier it is for the news to leak out. The Arabs wouldn't do something so foolish. Moreover, bribing a single Karluk requires 10 chests filled with pearls, agate, jade, and jewels. Even if the Arabian Empire is the wealthiest in the world, it wouldn't have that much money to throw around. Lord Protector General's words are reasonable. If the Arabs had done this, we would have received the news long ago. The Karluks wouldn't have been able to hide it from us so well." The generals nodded at Wang Chong's words, their expressions relaxing. Although Wang Chong was an outsider and didn't understand the situation in the Anxi Protectorate Army, his analysis was reasonable. In truth, there's another reason. Wang Chong paused for a moment, a bright light flashing through his eyes. In this battle of Talas, I only detained one Karluk tribesman. The battle was so intense that if the Arabs had bribed anyone else, the gates of Talas would have been broken long ago. There's no way that nothing would have happened until now. Moreover, it's been so long since the Ferdinand tribe has shown any signs of activity regarding Wan Hapelua's matter. Protector General Wang's words are reasonable. Qianli, go and take care of this matter. Explain the whole story and calm them down. Gao Xianji finally spoke. In addition, Protector General Wang, what do you think about these Karluk warriors? Gao Xianji was not a person without a mind of his own. The fact that he had asked for Wang Chang's opinion was enough to show that Wang Chang's methods had left a deep impression on him. At the very least, every word that Wang Chong spoke carried a great deal of weight in Gao Xianji's mind. Not too long ago, Gao Xianji had snorted disdainfully at Wang Chong. This was enough to prove Wang Chang's abilities and methods. 15,000 people. It'll take some effort to kill them all, Wang Chong indifferently said. Wanha Pelua's deputy generals felt their hearts thump at Wang Chang's words, and their faces instantly turned ghastly pale. But in the end, they're still a decent fighting force. If these fellows know what's good for them and cooperate, we might be able to spare their lives. Chapter 894. Wait a moment. Milords, betraying the Tang dynasty was Wanha Pelua's idea. He was blinded by greed, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. Milord, please give us a chance. Our Karluk tribe is willing to fight to the death for the Tang dynasty. Guli, the Karluk deputy leader captured by Qing Qianli, suddenly felt his knees go weak, his face pale as he loudly shouted. As soon as these words came out, there was silence all around. Gao Xianji stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes closed. No one could tell what he was thinking. Qing Qianli and the other officers of the Anxi Protectorate Army turned to Wang Chong. Wang Chong had been the one to discover the Karluk plot, and Gao Xianji had closed his eyes and said nothing. It was clear that he had given the initiative in this matter to Wang Chong. Moreover, the relationship between the Anxi Protectorate Army and the Karluks was too close, making it unsuitable for the Anxi Protectorate Army to handle this matter. On the other hand, Wang Chong, who had no relationship with the Karluks, had no stake in this matter, so he could fairly handle this matter. Humph, can I trust you? Wang Chong sneered as he stopped in front of Guli, his eyes filled with disdain as he looked down on this Karluk deputy leader. After doing such a thing, can the Karluks still be trusted? Milord, please give us another chance. I know that it's very difficult for you to trust us, but I swear on the gods of the tribes above the 9 heavens that our Karluk tribe will never rebel again. Moreover, aren't our people still in Milord's hands? If our Karluk tribe shows even the slightest hint of betrayal, Milord need not show any mercy. Kill them all. Our wives and children are all in Milord's hands. Milord can trust that we will not dare to act recklessly. Guli lowered his head and clenched his teeth. Wanha Pelua was already dead, and the situation was hopeless. Guli was well aware that the lives of every member of his tribe, including the 15,000 Karluk warriors in the city, rested on his words, and in the hands of this young protector general of only 17 or 18 years of age. With a single word from him, the famous Karluk tribe of the western regions, which had existed for over 1,000 years, would vanish into thin air and be erased from the face of the western regions. Wang Chong did not speak. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Guli, Guldo, and the other Karluk leaders knelt on the ground, not saying a word. Their faces were all pale, and an indescribable nervousness enveloped them. Before they knew it, large beads of sweat had appeared on their foreheads. Life and death could be decided in an instant. As long as this Qixi protector general of the Tang dynasty shook his head, someone's head would roll to the ground. The Karluks had always been fierce, or else they would not have become allies of the Anxi Protectorate Army. However, these people, who had experienced so many battles without so much as a frown, were now so nervous that their bodies were trembling uneasily. Humph! Wang Chong saw their reactions and sneered. He raised his head and glanced at Anxi Vice Protector General Qing Qianli. Qing Qianli hesitated for a moment before finally nodding. Wang Chong turned his head to the nearby Gao Xianji. Gao Xianji did not shake his head, nor did he nod, but his eyes had already given his answer. Consider yourselves lucky. Wang Chong coldly chuckled as he finally spoke. Phew. Upon hearing these words, the Karluk chieftains immediately let out a long sigh. Their faces were pale and they slumped to the ground as if on the verge of collapse. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of Karluks had escaped death. After all the battles they had experienced, nothing had been more shocking than this moment. There had been no glint of swords, no bloodbath, but it had been even more dangerous. Gully, don't celebrate too early. No one can tolerate betrayal. Sparing them doesn't mean forgiving them. Karluks. I never imagined that you would betray us. Qing Qianli sternly said as he released Gully's hands. Gully said nothing, his heart brimming with shame. General, be at ease. There will not be a next time. On the battlefield, we will prove to Milord whether or not the Karluks are still trustworthy. I hope so. Qing Qianli, Gully, and the other Karluk leaders quickly left. Wanhapelua's death and the 15,000 Karluk warriors in the city had to be dealt with. The only thing Wang Chong could do was dispatch more than 8,000 elite Qixi Protectorate soldiers into the city to intimidate the crowd. In addition, Chen Bin's 3,000 ballista teams were on standby to enter Talas. With the strength of this fully equipped ballista team, the 15,000 Karluks would need only a few seconds to clear the city. If Gully dared to have any other thoughts, he would truly be seeking his own death. Lord Protector General, how are your injuries? After watching Qing Qianli leave, Wang Chong turned to Gao Xianji and worriedly asked. Gao Xianji was in an extremely poor state. After 2 months of fierce fighting, Gao Xianji's armor was in tatters and his body was covered in wounds. His strength had dropped drastically. When he had attacked Wanhapeluo just now, Wang Chong had sensed that although Gao Xianji was still powerful, he was probably only 60% of his peak strength. This Battle of Talas was extremely important. Of the more than 100,000 people in the Tang dynasty, only Gao Xianji had reached the peak great general level of the Saint Martial realm. Not even Wang Chong could be considered one of them. Gao Xianji's condition was directly related to the outcome of this battle. Fortunately, I can hold on. Abu Muslim probably isn't doing much better than me. Gao Xianji seemed to know what Wang Chong was worried about. An imperial great general like Gao Xianji was one of the strongest existences in the world. The only person who could beat him into such a state and shatter his armor was the Abbasid Caliphate's governor of the East, Abu Muslim. Wang Chong smiled as he took out a brocade box and handed it over. What is this? Gao Xianji frowned in confusion. These are some pills that I obtained from the capital. They can help Lord Protector General recover from his injuries and recover his energy. Milord should take them in a little while. Wang Chong faintly smiled. Gao Xianji glanced at Wang Chong in shock. Wang Chong had made far more preparations for this battle than he had imagined, and they were far more thorough. He had even taken care of such minor details. Many thanks. After a moment's hesitation, Gao Xianji quickly took the box from Wang Chong's hands, opened it, and took out the largest silver-white pill, which he swallowed. At this sight, Wang Chong inwardly nodded. With a battle imminent, Gao Xianji's recovery was of the utmost importance. Gao Xianji clearly understood this, which was why he was so forthright. Milord fought with Abu Muslim for 2 months. What is Milord's impression of this Arab commander? Wang Chong asked. Cunning, cautious, decisive, and persistent. Gao Xianji didn't even think about it and said 4 words in a row. Buzz. Wang Chong instantly frowned at Gao Xianji's words. He knew that Gao Xianji had a very high evaluation of Abu Muslim, but Wang Chong had never imagined that someone of Gao Xianji's status would have such a high evaluation. Cunning, cautious, decisive, and persevering. These 4 words blurted out from Gao Xianji's mouth without even thinking. It was obvious that the Arab commander had left a deep impression on Gao Xianji in the last 2 months, which was why he was able to say these 4 words so quickly and without hesitation. These words might be derogatory when used by ordinary people, but when used by the commander of the enemy army, it was an extremely high evaluation. There was no doubt that Abu Muslim was an extremely troublesome and powerful opponent. Wang Chong, when fighting with Abu Muslim, you can't be the slightest bit careless. Otherwise, one wrong step will lead to the next, and you and I both know the final result. Gao Xianji solemnly said to Wang Chong. This was the first time Wang Chong had seen such a serious expression on Gao Xianji's face. Understood. Wang Chong solemnly nodded, but he quickly broke into a smile. But no matter how cunning and crafty he is, he won't stand a chance against me. The Arabs truly are very powerful, but alas, they shouldn't have made an enemy of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong's expression was carefree as he spoke, exuding a persuasive and infectious aura. Wang Chong was not Gao Xianji, much less Fomen Linta. He was the strongest war saint in the history of the Central Plains. No matter how powerful Abu Muslim was, he should never have provoked the Tang dynasty, and certainly not Wang Chong. No matter how cunning and crafty he was just displaying his slight skill before an expert and had no chance of victory. Gao Xianji was at first stunned by Wang Chong's words, but then he smiled. You're right. He truly shouldn't have made an enemy of the Tang dynasty. One Gao Xianji had kept the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Arabian Empire at Talas for 2 months, and now that Wang Chong had arrived, the number of soldiers defending the city had increased by more than 100,000. Abu Muslim's chances of victory were even lower. Gao Xianji quickly left. The city of Talas still had several thousand wounded soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army. Whether it was the Karluk incident or the Anxi Protectorate Army, he was needed to oversee the situation. As for Wang Chong's side, although his army had not yet entered the city, a large number of cattle, sheep, provisions, and armaments had all been transported into the city. Only the Karluks had been left outside the city by Wang Chong, guarded by the army. Marquis. When Gao Xianji entered the city, all the tranquil West generals had left. No one paid any attention to him, and Xue Qianjun finally moved closer to him. How did you know that Wanhe Peiluo would attack the Arab emissary the moment he saw him? If Wanhe Peiluo and Lord Gao Xianji had discovered that the Arab emissary was fake, wouldn't everything have been exposed? Xue Qianjun's voice was very soft, but the information he revealed was astonishing. That hooded Arab emissary that had thrown Wanhe Peiluo into such disarray and caused him to launch a sudden attack was actually a fake. If Wanhe Peiluo knew the truth, he would probably be so angry that he would come back to life. When Xue Qianjun had brought the Arab emissary over, he had appeared calm on the surface, but he was actually sweating on the inside. Others might not know the face of the Arab emissary, but he did. If Wanhe Peiluo had acted a little later or taken off his hood, in front of Anxi Protector General Gao Xianji and his other generals, the situation would have been extremely awkward. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.